Chapter 504. Reading. Geopa. As one of the first three major planes that had evolved from the essence of the Earth realm, Geopa had always been quite mysterious. Every star realm and plane had its own spatial coordinates, but not many people knew Geopa's coordinates. At least, not many people were qualified to enter this place. Under Geopa's deliberate guidance, Geopa became a semi-public plane. If outsiders wanted to enter, they had to go through a background and strength inspection. Of course, this was not strange. Inspections were something that most star realms would do. It was just that Geopa's requirements were particularly high. Only star lords with star realms were allowed to enter this place. Just this condition alone filtered down the number of people who were qualified to enter to less than 1,000. However, apart from this rule, Geopa looked very ordinary. He did not have any special rules, and he did not even have any special characteristics. K-Void was the origin of Taoism, and the Divine Emperor also had a human Tao legacy temple. Only Geopa had completely washed away the mark of the past. When Gunan stepped into this place, he saw an ordinary star realm, just like Geopa's ordinary face. What a rare guest! When Gunan stepped into this world, Geopa's voice sounded beside him. "HM, you've advanced again?" It had only been a few years since Gunan had fused with the Tao, but he had advanced again. This was indeed surprising, especially since most of his nomological laws had just been sealed. However, Geopa was not an ordinary person. He had also come from a crack world, and he had witnessed the collapse of the three realms in advance. It seems that the history you've seen has not ended yet. Geopa looked deeply at Gunan. He was one of the people who had benefited from history, and he knew that if he could use this advantage properly, it would bring him considerable benefits. Gunan did not comment on this. He only asked, "Do you have confidence in working together against a main god the last time?" "Yes." Geopa smiled. "However, my target is only Fan Luan. I won't consider anyone else." The master time, Fan Luan, Geopa's investment in inviting Gunan to work together was more of an excuse. So when Gunan came looking for him this time, he didn't hesitate any longer and told Gunan about his objective. Gunan didn't know how Fan Luan had offended the 9 spirits to the point that he wanted to kill him. However, in terms of time, it was clear that this was not due to historical reasons. Fan Luan's debut was much later than Geopa's, and even later than Netherworld Taoist incarnation, the god of dusk. But in terms of personality, it wasn't that strange. Fan Luan's experience and laws were more similar to Lu Wen's. However, his personality was similar to Zhou Jiming's. In other words, he was the king of hatred. Even within the world of gods, there were many who disliked him. Gunan thought about it and said, "Sure. When do we make our move?" Farron was also a new main god. Apart from the fact that his laws were a bit special, his true power might not even be as strong as Lorenza, who had been a bit younger than him. "I'll inform you when the time comes." "All right." Gunan nodded and turned to leave. Geopa glanced at his back and said, "You're going to the 3 Buddhas?" Gunan smiled. "Before I kill someone, I have to reclaim my power." The world of gods. A ray of light fell from the horizon and landed in an unknown god kingdom. It didn't seem right that it was unknown because this god kingdom belonged to a new high-tier god, the god of time. The god of time, who had just ascended to rank 8, had only just begun to make a name for himself in the world of gods. The god of time was not a rare law. There were many gods who had similar laws, but those who could truly reach a high level were few and far between. Firstly, this law was extremely obscure. Secondly, there was already a god of time high above them, causing the other gods to lose their motivation to advance. If it was just a law that overlapped with each other, there was still a chance. However, the god of time was extremely exclusive, and it was almost impossible for the later generations to succeed. To become the new main god of time, the only way was to wait for Fan Luan to fall, or make him fall. This rank 8 god of time, an unknown god named Sven, smiled after receiving the news from the other world. After leaving the 9 spirits, Gunan did not even return to his god kingdom. Instead, he descended directly into the 3 Buddhas. Although the Shadow Law could not affect Gu Nan's direct combat power compared to the heretic god's body, the characteristics of shadows were still quite useful. In order to go to the world of gods, Gu Nan undoubtedly needed the power of shadows to hide himself and launch a fatal blow. The Three Buddhas was a well-known Buddhist territory. Not many technological things were introduced here, and the people's faith was maintained pure. In a sense, the Three Buddhas were similar to the god kingdoms of the world of gods. The only difference was that the Master of the Stars did not rely on faith to obtain power. Among the Three Buddhas, the Buddhist sect was undoubtedly the most powerful sect in each region. The Buddhist temple was also an organization that had absolute authority over each region. The government was merely the executor of specific administrative measures. In the center of the Three Buddhas was the Holy Land in the hearts of all Buddhist disciples, the Three Buddha Temple. The Three Buddhas were also named after the Three Buddhas who established the world in ancient times. They were the founders of the Three Buddhas and also the founders of the Three Buddha Temple. At this time, there were some discordant voices in the Three Buddha Temple. 5 years have passed in the blink of an eye. Can you tell me why Gu Nan has not been suppressed yet? Monk Fa Kong sat on the golden lotus and looked at the Buddhas below. Although he was the Three Buddha Star Master, the work of suppressing the heretic demons was not something that he could complete alone. In fact, he was not even needed. Since most of the laws of Gu Nan were sealed and brought back to the Three Buddhas, the monks had never stopped suppressing the heretic demons. Only by suppressing the heretic demons in the astral world could the astral world truly benefit from it. However, the progress of this work had been very slow. The outside world thought that the Three Buddhas could even seal Tao integration practitioners and had truly achieved suppression. Unexpectedly, the Three Buddhas had not benefited from it so far. At first, everyone thought that it was because Tao integration level heretic demons were rare and needed more time. However, there was no progress in suppressing the heretic demons. This made Fa Kong angry. Hearing Fa Kong's question, a monk below could not help but stand up and speak. Uncle Master, based on the experience of this monk and the other Uncle Masters, the laws left by Benefactor Gu Nan do not seem to be affected by the Buddha light of subduing world. What do you mean? Fa Kong suddenly had a bad feeling. That is, the monk looked embarrassed. Benefactor Gu Nan may not be a heretic demon. Chapter 505. Read. Although he said it was possible, the monk knew very well that this was most likely the truth. There had never been an evil spirit at the level of Tao integration, but they had sealed demonic treasures of this level, so they were not completely inexperienced. Even at that time, they had never heard that the target of the seal would not respond to the Buddha's light, and the law left by Gu Nan was not affected by the Buddha's light at all. If this was the case, the Three Buddhas would probably suffer a great loss. Before the monk could think about how to make this news true, the bad news had already fallen. At the moment when the roof of the Three Buddha Temple collapsed, the monk Fa Kong had already stood up and chanted the name of Buddha again. The golden light reappeared and pushed the falling roof back up. Fa Kong recognized who the person was at a glance and immediately said, Amitabha, Benefactor Gu Nan, this is really a misunderstanding. Before he finished saying the word misunderstanding, his fist smashed down and hit Fa Kong's head. After all, Fa Kong had seen the horror of Gu Nan. Moreover, they were in the Three Buddha realm. He knew that he could not avoid Gu Nan's punch, so he simply did not dodge. With a shake of his body, a round of Buddha's light slowly rose behind him. His whole body appeared to have 3 heads and 8 arms. His whole body turned golden like a Vajra body. Fa Kong had gathered the power of the Three Buddha realms and used the power of Vajra to resist Gu Nan's punch. He had indeed done it. After the punch, although there was a huge sound of metal and stone colliding, Fa Kong was not directly destroyed by this punch. On the contrary, the aftermath of this terrifying punch set off an impact in the hall of the Three Buddha Temple. Most of the monks were directly thrown out, so there were many who died. Fa Kong also saw this scene and showed a look of pity. Benefactor, since you are not an evil spirit, why do you want to increase the sin of killing? If you are dissatisfied with me, why don't you let me take 3 punches from you? Okay. Gunan agreed happily and punched F.A. Kong's head again. F.A. Kong's mouth twitched slightly. He really wanted to give him 3 punches without conditions, but unfortunately, Gunan did not listen to his nonsense at all. Regardless of whether there were conditions or not, they would still be beaten. His diamond body reappeared, and the sound of collision this time was even louder. It was even to the extent that it was sharp, ear-piercing, and distorted the laws of nature. All the monks had already covered their ears and fled. They were unable to endure the might of a battle at the Tao integration stage. To be precise, it could not be considered a fight. It was just Gunan beating up monk F.A. Kong. This time, Gunan was no longer punching. Instead, it was like a violent storm. His fists were like bullets, and he was going to turn monk F.A. Kong into a sieve. No matter how strong the Vajra body was, it could not withstand such a blow. Monk F.A. Kong did not even make a sound before he was smashed into countless pieces by Gunan. He wasn't in a hurry to reincarnate and send himself to his death. Gunan didn't bother with him as his gaze landed on the monk who had spoken previously. "Where's my law?" Gunan patted Tyrant's shoulder and asked. "Amitabha." Tyrant stood up. He was one of the few monks who had not been affected by the shockwave. "Although you are not an evil demon, your murderous nature is greater than that of a true demon. Forgive me for not being able to comply." Gunan glanced at him and asked, "Aren't you afraid of death?" Tyrant revealed a peaceful smile. "I'm not afraid." "Then, are you afraid that they will die?" Gunan pointed at a monk lying on the ground. Because the sound of the law had entered his ears, he was bleeding from his 7 orifices and lying on the ground. He was exhaling more than he was inhaling. The next moment, Gunan stepped on the monk's head, causing it to explode. Blood splattered on the monk's face. You. Tyrant raised his head in shock and pointed at Gunan, unable to speak for a long time. "Where's my law?" Gunan asked again coldly. Tyrant gritted his teeth and did not speak. Unfortunately, after witnessing the death of several monks, he could no longer hold on and personally took Gunan to the place where the law was sealed. In fact, it was not difficult to find the place where Gunan's law was sealed. After all, the 3 Buddha temple was only so big. He could find it after a few rounds. It was just that Gunan was too lazy to look for it himself. There were monks staying in the temple. It would be fine if they pretended not to see the 2. However, if they dared to come forward, they would naturally not be able to escape from Gunan. After a while, the law of shadow returned to his body. Gunan patted his butt and left the 3 Buddha temple, leaving behind a mess. When the news came out, the people who had been arguing about whether Gunan would die or not could calm down. Of course, even the most optimistic people would not have thought that in just 5 years, Gunan would kill his way back to the 3 Buddha temple and give the big monks a hard slap in the face. The first to receive the news of Gunan retrieving the law was none other than the Gods' Union. Inside the Ziluo temple, Zhuangxian and the Grand Sage Celestial Empress stood behind the old man Ziluo and listened to him narrate the battle of the 3 Buddha temple. As a Tao fusing expert, the old man paid close attention and did not miss the beginning and the end of the battle. Senior Gunan has an extraordinary background. It may not be a bad thing for the organization to draw a line with him, Zhuangxian said after a moment of silence. His mind was clearer than anyone else's. He knew that a person like Gunan would not be easily manipulated. Rather than forcing him to stay in the organization, it was better to have nothing to do with him. The Grand Sage Celestial Empress also remained silent. She thought of the time when Gunan had not yet fused with the Tao and had just stepped into the world realm. It seemed like it was just yesterday. The common sense of cultivation in the world had been broken by him time and time again. It did not matter if he did it again. The old man sighed softly and said, "Schwerin could not see through it, so he died. Zhuangxian, the organization is now in your hands. I hope that you will not learn from him in the future. Learn more from your master." Daoist Spirit Son had inexplicably stepped down from the management of the organization. He had even given up on the astral realm and wholeheartedly went to the world of gods to develop again. This was indeed a little strange. At the mention of his master, Zhuang Xian slowly raised his head. Is master still a member of the organization? Of course. The old man smiled. Your master has always been in the organization. After retrieving his law, Gunan did not delay any further and quickly returned to his god nation. In the meantime, he also went to the crack world to take a look. Fu Chang had done a good job in monitoring the situation. According to Gunan's request, she monitored every player who had advanced to the second transition. First, she monitored their safety. Then, she monitored their living habits and other details. However, as the monitoring deepened, she did not obtain the results that Gunan wanted. Instead, it only proved one thing. The Blue Star Federation was really safe after several hundred years. None of the players had met with any mishap. However, Gunan was not too anxious. Up until now, there had not been any players who had advanced to the third transition. This could not prove anything. Chapter 506. Read, The World of Gods. While Gunan was wreaking havoc in the three Buddha heaven and massacring all the Buddhas, a small matter happened in the world of gods. It was indeed a very small matter. The great Lord of Time, Fanluan, had accidentally discovered a young boy with extraordinary aptitude while traveling the mortal realm and brought him back to his god kingdom. The boy became the new holy son of the main god's temple and received the Lord's inheritance. Such things happened from time to time and were nothing out of the ordinary. However, the truly extraordinary matter was yet to come. The boy displayed astonishing aptitude, especially his sensitivity to the law of time, which was far beyond ordinary standards. The oracle in charge of teaching him was overjoyed. Not only did he do his best to teach the boy, he also hurriedly reported the news to Fanluan. However, just as the main god's temple rejoiced over the birth of a young prodigy in the god kingdom, a piece of news caught the main god's temple by surprise. The boy was not a mortal, but a son of God who had been left behind in the mortal realm. His father was the god of time, Sven. It was not uncommon for a son of God to be left behind. Otherwise, there would not be so many myths and legends in the main plane. However, it was very awkward for a son of God to be chosen by another god, especially since the boy had already been brought back to the main god's temple to receive a new inheritance. Should this person be returned? Logically speaking, this was the son of a god, so it was reasonable. However, the boy had already received the Lord's inheritance, so how could he be returned? Moreover, this matter could not be blamed on the person involved. He was just a 4-year-old boy. How could he understand such things? Fanluan felt a headache when he heard about this, but he was never one to think too much about others. After some thought, he said, "Leave the boy. If Sven wants him back, tell him to come see me personally." When Fanluan's words spread, some people felt that his actions were shameless, but he was a great being after all, so no one dared to say anything. That was until Sven obediently went to the god kingdom of time and personally asked Fanluan for his son. Others might be afraid of offending Fanluan, but Sven was not. After all, he was also a lord of time. As long as Fanluan was alive, he would never become a lord, so he was no threat to others. No one knew the details of the discussion between the two. They only knew that they parted on bad terms, and Sven did not bring his son back. However, after returning to the divine kingdom, Sven summoned his believers regardless of anything and brazenly launched a war against the divine kingdom of time. A level 8 god declaring war against a main god. This might sound ridiculous, but those who knew the whole story would be able to feel a sense of tragedy. Perhaps because they felt that they were in the wrong. The Time Divine Kingdom did not respond to this. They just passively defended against the invasion from the outside world. Of course, this sort of invasion was meaningless. After all, a Tier 8 Divine Kingdom's foundation was far inferior to a main god's Divine Kingdom. Otherwise, Sven's Divine Kingdom would have been razed to the ground in a matter of minutes. However, Sven seemed to have gone mad. He continued to pour in all his power, and because of the Son of God, his believers were all unafraid of death. None of them succumbed to the power of the Time God Kingdom. At this moment, a message was sent to Gunan. The time is ripe. I didn't expect you to have a share. Gunan stood at the border of the heavenly world. In a frontline plane, He looked at Jiu-Pa and Luwen. Luwen smiled. Or rather, it's my share. Jiu-Pa and Fan Luwen have some conflict, but it's not to this extent. Gunan glanced at the two and nodded. He did not doubt this. Back when he had just stepped onto the front lines, he had encountered Luwen and Fan Luwen fighting. At that time, the two of them were fighting over the time arena. The two of them had ascended at similar times, and their laws were almost the same. However, he did not expect Luwen to have already made preparations. How are you going to get there? Gunan asked. Gunan had the law of shadows and was relatively familiar with the world of gods. It was not difficult for him to hide. However, Jiu-Pa and Luwen were different. It was relatively difficult for existences at the level of the two worlds to interact without being discovered. Back then, in order to kill Gunan, Austin and the Lord of Nightmares had to rely on the power of the Dream Immortals' return to project the power of the laws here. They could only form a single attack. Jiu-Pa said, I have my own ways to get there, and I'm already here. An enigmatic smile appeared on Luwen's face. The time God's Divine Kingdom War had reached its true climax. Even he himself had gone into battle, and it seemed as if he would not rest until he was dead. Even the surrounding gods could not understand. It was just a son of God. Why go to this extent? However, even if they did not understand, there was a reason for it. They could only watch and see how things would develop in the end. This development was completely out of everyone's expectations. Fan Luwen was injured. Finally, unable to endure Sven's repeated harassment, the time god could not help but take action personally to chase away this annoying fly. And then, he was injured by this fly's hand. A mere level 8 god, who could barely be considered a high-level god, had actually injured a mighty lord. This matter had completely overturned common sense. The person involved, Sven, became famous in this battle, and his name spread throughout the world of gods in a short period of time. Every faction tried to find out how Sven had done this, and the results were rather shocking. It was said that because the two of them had the same laws, Fan Luwen had wanted to rely on his own understanding of time to forcefully reverse Sven's laws and let him understand the gap between them. However, it was precisely because of this action that he discovered that Sven's understanding of time was actually above his own, to the point of being one with space and time. Who are you? Fan Luwen looked at Sven in front of him, his eyes cold. He had been injured because of the laws, but the injuries were not serious. Instead, the other party was still unwilling to let him go, which made him realize that something was wrong. This was definitely not an ordinary god, but the other party had the laws of time. Could it be that some fallen lord had revived? The time god Sven had a faint smile on his face, not at all like he had been robbed of his son of God. Rather than worrying about who I am, why don't you think about how you're going to get through this, Fan Luwen could not help but sneer. The other party's understanding of the laws had indeed exceeded his expectations, but to say that it could threaten him was an exaggeration. The gap between a lord and an ordinary god was not something that could be made up for with just a little bit of understanding. Otherwise, wouldn't the reincarnation of an almighty be invincible? If not for his suspicions about this person's identity, Fan Luwen would have long since killed him. At this point, Fan Luwen no longer hesitated, and that was exactly what he did. With a slight thought, the endless rain of time suddenly fell, its target being Sven. This was an attack that had materialized the laws, a confrontation of raw power. It was not something that could be reversed with mere understanding. However, Sven allowed the rain to fall on his body, as if he did not feel it all. Finally, an unfamiliar aura began to emanate from his body, allowing Fan Luwen to truly recognize him. Chapter 507. Reading. Of course, Fan Luwen could recognize Luwen. The two of them had only fought for a few decades. This amount of time was like the blink of an eye for overgods. Fan Luwen finally realized that this was a plot against him. What time god? He was just a clone of the person before him. Who knew how many years he had schemed for him to leave behind a flawless clone here? No one would have thought that this was the truth. Luwen. Fan Luwen was an overgod after all. After his initial shock, he quickly calmed down. He was in his own divine kingdom. What was there to be afraid of against an opponent of the same level? Even though he had been injured by the sneak attack, He did not believe that the other party could take him down so easily. As time passed, the other overgods would definitely notice that something was wrong here. When the 13 overgods surrounded him, the other party would probably have to think about how to escape. However, just as Fan Luan had this thought, he felt a chill behind him. A shadow had appeared behind him at some point, and a shadow, sword directly pierced into his back. The power of this sword was so great that even a shadow sword itself could not withstand it. The laws seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. With Gunan's current cultivation level, the body of the heretic god seemed to be able to crush his own laws, reaching a whole new level. To Gunan, the increase in his cultivation level was more important in strengthening his body, making it harder for others to withstand his attacks and destroy his body. As for the laws themselves, they became insignificant. Fan Luan was indeed unable to resist this punch at all. His divine body instantly turned into pure laws and scattered everywhere in the divine kingdom. With Luan around, he naturally could not let him escape. He had already completely sealed off the divine kingdom of time. This was a divine kingdom constructed from the laws of time. Since Fan Luan had no time to manage it, it was much easier for Luan to take over. For a moment, Gunan had a feeling that it would be much more convenient to bring someone with the same laws when he killed overgods in the future. Of course, apart from Fan Luan, he probably would not have such an opportunity in the future. Gunan's aura only appeared for a moment. After killing Fan Luan once, he did not appear again to avoid attracting the attention of the other overgods. Foolish man. Fan Luan's voice reverberated throughout the entire divine kingdom. He was the time master, and this was his own divine kingdom. Even if his divine body was destroyed, he would not retreat. However, Fan Luan was no fool. He wasn't stupid enough to condense another divine body and wait for Gunan to instantly kill him. He was purely controlling the laws to fight. Of course, without his divine body as a focal point, his control over the nomological laws was also weakened. If Gunan were to turn around and destroy his divine kingdom, he would be able to destroy his tens of thousands of years of hard work in a short time. However, the reason he had done so was because Fan Luan had recognized Gunan in the moment he had attacked. He was betting that the other party would not dare to appear again. With just Luan alone, he would be able to delay the other party with just his laws. Fan Luan was right, but also wrong. His mistake was that he thought that Gunan would not appear again, but he did not expect that the other party would come with more than 2 people. An inexplicable fluctuation reverberated from the time divine kingdom. All the living beings in the entire divine kingdom suddenly felt a slight tremor under their feet, and then the tremor rapidly increased in a short period of time. Earthquake! Earthquake! Earth! No, this is not an earthquake. This was indeed not a simple earthquake. Instead, the entire earth veins have been turned upside down from the 9 underworlds. Under the overturned earth, whether you were a deity or a mortal, you would not have any ability to resist. Some people tried to use the nomological laws to calm the earth, but unfortunately, they did not know that this phenomenon was caused by the supreme nomological laws. The 9 Souls Star Lord, 9 souls controlled the power of the earth veins and the 9 underworlds. He had the ability to devour the earth, and with a flip of his hand, he could destroy tens of thousands of living beings. By the time Fan Luan realized this, it was already too late for him to stop it, and the true realm of 9 souls was undoubtedly revealed under this attack. 15 levels. This world's most ancient Star Lord was already a super expert on par with Austin, and truly stood at the peak of the world. Under the suppression of 15 levels of nomological laws, and with Luan restraining him from the side, Fan Luan could not resist at all. He could only watch as his divine kingdom fell. All of you will die here. Fan Luan could not help but reform his body and angrily stared at Luan. You should worry about yourself first. A calm voice rang out behind him. With a punch from Gunan, this newly formed divine body also shattered. And after Gunan revealed himself this time, he no longer had any intention of hiding. With the huge commotion caused by 9 souls, it was impossible for the other lords to not notice it. What they needed to do now was to race against time. Do it. Luan naturally understood this as well. He shouted in a low voice, but his hands did not slow down as he swept through the divine kingdom as quickly as possible. For deities, the divine kingdom was their foundation, while for lords, their divine kingdom became their shield. If one wanted to kill a lord who had already fused with the nomological laws, they first had to destroy their divine kingdoms. Only then would they have a chance of stripping their divine duties. A lord god's divine kingdom was naturally extremely prosperous, but under the combined forces of 3 Tao integration stage cultivators, it was still unable to withstand a single blow. Disregarding everything else, just the overturning of the earth veins was enough to destroy the divine kingdom. Before the other lords arrived, the divine kingdom of time had already been completely destroyed. Luan heaved a sigh of relief. Next, they just had to find Fan Luan's location and kill him. However, at this moment, Nine Soul's expression changed slightly. Austin is here. You two go find Fan Luan. His body swayed, and the 9 souls abruptly disappeared, only to be replaced by boundless holy light. Intruders. Austin's gaze landed on the 2 of them, holy light surrounding him flickering faintly. By taking in the evil god, you are no different from accompanying him in death. Luan laughed. You don't have to worry about that. As soon as his voice fell, a dim light suddenly lit up on the ground and pounced straight at Austin. This god of light and justice did not even raise his head. He merely pointed casually, and holy light instantly enveloped the ground below. The 2 beams of light collided, but seemed to be evenly matched. This was because the level of nomological laws was similar, and the difference in their cultivation levels was also similar. It was impossible to determine the victor in a short period of time. Meanwhile, Nine Soul's intention was only to delay Austin and allow Lu Wan and Gunan to kill Fan Luan before the other lord arrived. Unfortunately, Nine Souls had never truly exchanged blows with Austin before, so he had miscalculated 1 point. The other party did not just wield holy light. Austin frowned slightly. As the holy light flickered, he had already revealed his true form. There were 12 pairs of pure white wings on his back, and his golden, curly hair almost reached his waist. He held a holy sword in his left hand, but his right hand was raised lightly. Chapter 508. Read, Austin was too powerful. He was hailed as the #1 main god in history, not only because of his extremely terrifying holy light, but also because he wielded 2 main god laws. Light and justice, both were the supreme laws of this world. At this moment, Austin thrust his sword out, and a projection of his sword landed where the holy light and 9 underworlds intersected. The power of the 2 sides rapidly melted away. After all, Giopa was fighting away from home and was unable to receive the support of his own star realm. How could he possibly compare to Austin in terms of the number of laws? In just an instant, a hole was torn open in the power of 9 underworlds, and the holy light rapidly surged in the direction where Lu Wan and Fan Lu had disappeared. However, right at this moment, a large black hole suddenly appeared at the top of the holy light, as if it had been forcefully blown apart by someone. Giopa also took this opportunity to quickly mend the hole that had suddenly appeared. Only then did he have the thought to look in that direction. Gunan's figure, which was punching forward, gradually appeared in the dissipating holy light. His entire body was covered in burn marks from the holy light, but they were recovering rapidly. He even flashed a smile at Austin. With Gunan's understanding of Austin, he naturally wouldn't let go of Giopo's mistake. Evil God. Dense killing intent appeared in Austin's cold eyes, and he hurled his holy sword out without hesitation. Gunan was also very straightforward. Knowing that he had been fixed on the spot by the holy light, he didn't even bother to dodge, allowing the holy sword to pierce through his heart. Then, as if nothing had happened, he patted the wound and quickly turned to leave, stepping on Austin's holy sword as he did so. Fan Luan couldn't have run far. The divine kingdom of time had been sealed by Lu Wan, and he himself had been injured twice. His godhead had already been mostly destroyed, so where could he run to? Fan Luan was naturally unreasonable, and he had never suffered such a great loss ever since he had reached the Tao integration stage. At this moment, he couldn't help but want to put his life on the line. Fan Luan's figure reappeared, and he mobilized the remaining power of the divine kingdom of time. Taking advantage of the fact that Gu Nan had yet to return, he attacked Lu Wan with all his might. Lu Wan merely smiled. "I wasn't afraid of you even as a clone, let alone now." As soon as he finished speaking, Fan Luan felt as if the reign of time had suddenly reversed. Space and time had become chaotic and disorderly, completely out of his control. Time and space. An intoxicated look appeared in Fan Luan's eyes. The realm of space and time as one was exactly what he had been pursuing. Now that he saw in the hands of the enemy, it was really what he didn't know was that Lu Wan had already obtained the grand Taos of space and time when he fused the Tao all those years ago. It was just that Lu Wan Dao's understanding of the law of space was too shallow back then, and he had no choice but to separate his comprehension of the law of space, which formed the space dragon that he carried with him. The two of them belonged to two different great worlds and achieved the great Tao of time in the same era, but the difference in their realms was still there. Due to the reversal of space-time, Fan Luan's laws were completely suppressed. He couldn't even put up any effective resistance, and could only watch helplessly as his godhead was repeatedly eroded by time. Having lost his divine kingdom as his foundation, Fan Luan was depleting his law energy with every passing second, and it looked like he was about to perish in the reign of time. But at this time, who could save him? Austin was held up by Jiupa, and the other main gods had yet to arrive. Moreover, even if they did arrive, would they have the ability to break into the reign of time? Just as Fan Luan was sinking into despair, he sensed an aura appear beside him, seemingly completely unaffected by the reign of time. There really was someone who could enter. In the next instant, Fan Luan's body shattered. This time, even his godhead was completely shattered, and there was no chance of him surviving. With the combined power of 3 Tao integration stage cultivators, coupled with Lu Wan's countless years of planning, a main god had finally perished. Gunan's figure appeared beside Lu Wan. He didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt for snatching Fan Luan's head. After all, to him, Fan Luan's death would only count. Lu Wan didn't care about this. After Fan Luan died, he rapidly gathered up his shattered godhead, and the time laws that belonged to Fan Luan all fell into his hands. "Let's go." Jiupo's voice sounded beside their ears. Having achieved their goal, the three of them had no intention of staying any longer. If they stayed any longer, they might be trapped by the other main gods forever. From the moment Gunan and the other two entered the world of gods to the moment Fan Luan died, the entire process did not take more than 15 minutes. With the 3 Tao integration stage cultivators joining forces, they fully demonstrated what was called efficiency. The main reason why a main god could perish so easily was because Lu Wan had made sufficient preparations, leaving Fan Luan with nowhere to run and completely unprepared. When Fan Luan let down his guard and allowed Lu Wan's doppelganger to enter the divine kingdom, and even arrive in front of him, his fate had already been sealed. When Lu Wan arrived in the world of gods, he had no time to waste. He immediately released the laws that he had gathered up. He didn't hide from Jiupa and Gunan. Perhaps it was because he couldn't care less, because Fan Luan's godhead had already been shattered by Gunan, and it was already showing signs of dissipating. The time laws were flung out by Lu Wan, gradually emitting waves of faint light. Then they transformed into the silhouette of a dragon. Lu Wan raised his hand again, and a shadow flew out from his sleeve. It was Gunan's old friend, the space dragon named Long Longer, who had originally been perched on Lu Wan's shoulder, hid in his sleeve this time, only appearing now. After she soared into the sky, she rapidly drew close to the dragon's silhouette. At this moment, the silhouette also quickly solidified, forming a new giant dragon. Space and time twin dragons. Jiupa gazed at the scene in the sky and could not help but sigh. It really is him. As Jiupa spoke, Lu Wan slowly closed his eyes. His body also began to float in midair, gradually fusing with the space and time twin dragons. As the space dragon, Long was born from Lu Wan's comprehension and the new time dragon was also born from Luwen. They could be said to be of the same origin. Now, the three were actually gradually fusing together. Just like that, Luwen sat cross-legged in midair, while the space and time twin dragons gradually fused into his body. In the end, they formed a strange pattern between his brows. This was a pattern formed by two giant dragons, one black and one white, intertwining together. It was like a diagonal diagram of the yin-yang diagram, and it was filled with a wondrous aura. So it's you. Yu Lian's figure had already appeared at some point in time, and her gaze towards Luwen was strangely familiar. Who is he? Gunan did not know who he was, so he asked Yu Lian shamelessly. According to seniority, I should call him senior granduncle. Yu Lian sighed. He was once my Dong Su's traitor. Luwen smiled as he continued Yu Lian's words. He wore a black and white Taoist robe, and a 7-star Taoist crown on his head. He clasped his hands towards Gunan. Chapter 509. Reading. Time record. Gunan, Jiupa, and Luwen all sat down. The former two looked the same as before, while only Luwen maintained his previous attire. The black and white Taoist robe, the 7-star Taoist crown, and the twin dragon yin-yang symbol between his eyebrows made Luwen look extremely handsome, as if he was not an ordinary person. So, are you going to continue to be this showy in the future? Gunan asked as he looked at Luwen. Luwen was already used to Gunan's style and smiled without any surprise. This is my original appearance. As for what Yu Lian has, it's just what she thinks. Original appearance? Gunan raised his eyebrows. Previous life. Luwen revealed an amused smile. You know which previous life I'm talking about. Of course Gunan knew. The martial granduncle that Yu Lian spoke of was the former traitor of Dong Su, the disciple of the second-generation sage, the yin-yang Taoist. According to Yu Lian's knowledge, Luwen was clearly the reincarnation of the yin-yang Taoist. But from Luwen's words, his current attire was not that of the yin-yang Taoist, but from his real, previous life, the crack world. There were cultivators in the crack world, there was no doubt about that. Even a technological civilization like the Blue Planet could develop a basic cultivation system like the Origin Force after a few hundred years of development. It was naturally more normal for a cultivation civilization to exist. Gunan, Jiupa, and Huang Quan Taoist all clearly came from a technological civilization. The latter two only knew a little of their history, so they did not have much of an advantage. Gunan, on the other hand, had an evil god's temple and a highly realistic game, which gave him the experience of cultivation. His advantage was already far greater than the other two. And now there was Luwen, who seemed to have been a cultivator in his previous life. In my previous life, I stood at the edge of Tao integration, but because I tried to combine two great Taos, I died from Tao punishment. Luwen shook his head lightly. No wonder he could reach this step so easily, and was so familiar with the law of space and time. It seemed like he was really the reincarnation of a supreme being. A strange look appeared in Gunan's eyes. That world can also reach this level? Did you not notice the abnormality of the world? Even an ordinary Star-Lord would be able to roam the entire spatial rift, let alone someone at the brink of Tao integration. All they needed was enough time. We call that place the original realm. As a starry sky plane, the original realm itself is sufficiently vast and sealed off. Luwen looked at Gunan and Jiupa and said, in my previous world, there were people who had fused the Tao in the civilization. They were also known as saints. But even the saints have never seen the world outside the original realm. Gunan's eyes began to show some understanding. According to this method, the great cosmos that the Blue Planet was in his previous life would be the original realm that Luwen had mentioned. There was a cultivation civilization here, and there were even experts at the Path Integration realm. However, it was completely isolated from the outside world. Gunan did not doubt this because he had seen with his own eyes the bit wall between the original realm and the outside world. It was so powerful that even he could not break through it directly. He could only descend through a wisp of his will. Based on Gunan's limited knowledge from his previous life, the universe where the Blue Planet was located was indeed larger than most of the dimensions. Even the astral world and the Milky Way, which were also starry sky planes, could not compare to the original realm in terms of actual size. Then how did you get out? Gunan looked at Lu Wen and asked. With Lu Wen's cultivation at that time, he should not have been completely unaware of the process of leaving the original realm. Lu Wen began to reveal a bitter smile. He turned to look at Jiupe, indicating for him to explain this question. And Jiupe did not refuse, sighing and saying, under the calamity, just as his soul was about to be destroyed, he was rescued by someone. I have always suspected that it was Yellow Spring, but he never admitted it. Lu Wen also nodded and said, back then, I also could not tell who did it. But looking at the time, it is indeed fellow Yellow Spring who is most likely. Gunan began to frown. When he combined the information from Jiupe, Lu Wen, and Yellow Spring Taoist, it gave him a strange feeling. He felt as if something was missing. Jiupe said that Yellow Spring Taoist went to search for his hometown and disappeared without a trace. He had never seen him again. Lu Wen called his hometown the original realm, but he did not come to the two worlds naturally. Instead, he was rescued by someone, and the time matched with Yellow Spring's disappearance. And Yellow Spring Taoist called the original realm the Crack World. This was because he had indeed found the location of the original realm. It was right in the crack between the two worlds. What Jiupe said should be true. If he knew the location of the original realm, there was no need for him to waste words with him. He could have gone straight to Yellow Spring. The only possibility was that he still did not know where his hometown was. He had only determined Gunan's origins, and from some of his strange actions, he had found out that Gunan might have met Yellow Spring Taoist. In reality, if not for the fact that the world of gods did not match the game's history, Gunan would not have been able to follow the clues and find Yellow Spring Taoist in the crack. And there was one thing that Gunan did not understand. If Yellow Spring Taoist had really rescued Lu Wen, why would he deny it? And why would he let Lu Wen fall into Jiupe's hands? But if it was not Yellow Spring's doing, could it be that there was someone from the same hometown? Several thoughts circled around in Gunan's mind. He did not speak for a moment, and just sank into deep thought. Lu Wen and Jiupe did not disturb him. Seeing that he had made some decisions, Lu Wen said, the matter of the original realm is in the past. Gunan, if you can meet Yellow Spring Taoist and take care of a few old friends for me, that will be enough. All right. Gunan thought for a moment and finally nodded. If there was a chance, he really did want to return to the original realm to take a look. This was not a simple exchange with Fu Cheng, but a true descent of his will. Then, next is the most important matter. Jiupe finally stood up and said with a smile, is what happened just now not important? Gunan asked, pursing his lips. What happened next is more important, Jiupe said seriously. Fan Luan is dead, and war is inevitable. It might even affect those at the level of path integration. Gunan, if you want to act against the Master God, we can help. Gunan raised his head to look at Jiupe, and then looked at Lu Wen. What are the conditions? He did not believe that these two would help out of the kindness of their hearts. There must be a reason for everyone to do something. Jiupe smiled and said, if we ask you to tell us the whereabouts of Yellow Spring, you will most likely not be willing. I'm afraid that we will not be able to completely trust you. As long as the time is right, you can stand on our side. From his words, Gunan could hear the bloodthirst that seeped deep into his bones. He could not help but smile faintly. You want to become enemies with the entire universe. I want to go home. There was no expression on Jiupe's face. I have already been a path integration practitioner for tens of thousands of years. I'm tired. I just want to go home and take a look. Chapter 510. Reading. When Gunan reappeared in the Divine Kingdom, it was already 3 days after he left the timeline. He believed that Jiupe was telling the truth. If there was no Netherworld Taoist, and he didn't know that there was someone who came from the same place as him, perhaps Jiupe could have stayed in the various worlds and become one of his great ancient powers. Unfortunately, Netherworld Taoist went to find his hometown, and Jiupe didn't choose to go with him until he found Zero, Lu Wen, and Gunan. If we kill all the main gods and Tao, fusing masters of the two worlds, and combine the power of the two worlds, maybe we can break the bit wall? Gunan touched his chin and thought for a while. He began to agree with this plan. A normal person would probably think of aligning with the existing unification masters to find and develop the original realm together. But Jiopa, who came up with this plan, was obviously not a normal person, and Gunan, who accepted it, was even less so. Let's give it a try. Next, Lorenza. Gunan looked at the stack of information on the table. It was all about a person's experiences over the years. This person's name was Dong's son. The world of gods. 13 main gods. Oh, there are only 12 main gods left now. They gathered together again and discussed Fan Luan's death. We can't pretend that nothing happened. Eugene, the Lord of War, slammed the table. This time it was Fan Luan. Who will be next? Then what do you think we should do? Daisy, the Lady of Darkness, looked at him with a smile. Kill them, Eugene said without hesitation. Austin also spoke at this time. The mastermind of this is Lu Wan. He has been planning to kill Fan Luan for a long time. Sven, the God of Time, is his clone. Gunan and the other two acted too quickly. The other main gods couldn't even get to the scene in time and didn't understand the situation at the time. After listening to Austin's narration, they realized that the other party had hidden a clone and attacked Fan Luan in such an unpredictable way. Is there another evil god involved? Kos, the Lord of Nightmares, said in a low voice. He had personally been to many worlds and witnessed Gunan's strangeness and strength, so he couldn't help but say, "The evil god's growth is too fast. We don't have time to drag this on. If it was just Van Luan's death, the dark gods wouldn't have enough reason to make a move. However, if the evil god was involved, no one would be able to stay out of it." After a moment of silence, Lady of Darkness Daisy finally said, "Then, let's start an all-out war." Reality had proven that no provocation was more provocative than directly killing a main god. Starting an all-out war meant that the light and darkness god systems had started to set aside all of their disputes and start a war with the core gods as the vanguard. But ever since the ancient times when the two worlds had interacted with one another, there had never been such a large-scale and high-level exchange of fire. In the past, the two sides did not have much of conflict of interest, and killing the other side would not bring them any benefits. This caused the war to lack motivation. However, things were different now. The gods were not fighting for benefits, but for their own survival. If the fusing masters of the various worlds were allowed to continue like this, sooner or later, the lords of the Pantheon world would die one by one, and in the end, an all-out invasion would come. And once the core gods took the lead, the gods did not hesitate at all. Immediately, a large number of gods decided to participate in the war. The aftermath of Operation Hunt the Gods had not yet passed. Come to think of it, this was all Gunan's fault. The Pantheon world had finally started an all-out war. Wave after wave of god armies surged into the various worlds, their targets being the astral realms of the astral lords. When the gods decided to launch a large-scale invasion, one of the disadvantages of the various worlds was finally revealed. Unlike the god kingdoms that were completely chosen by the gods, the astral lords' astral realms were essentially natural planes of existence. That was why god kingdoms could be built in very remote locations, but the astral lords' astral realms could only adjust their positions slightly, and traces could always be found. In a short span of 3 days since the start of the war, the unprepared worlds had suffered a great loss. Many astral realms had been destroyed by the gods, and the astral lords had lost their foundations. 1,000 years of hard work had been destroyed in a day. The last time the two worlds had started a war, the battlefield was actually in the Pantheon world. It was a war between the gods and the invaders, and the astral lords had never experienced such heartache. When they understood the inside story behind the start of the war, it was not that no one secretly blamed Lu Wan and the others. However, when they found out that Gunan was also involved, not many people said anything more. Your reputation among the astral lords is much greater than that of us old fellows. Li Si smiled as he spoke to Gu Nan during the meeting of the fusing masters on the various worlds side. Gu Nan pursed his lips and said, "The more you kill, the better your reputation will be." Li Si did not know how to respond to this kind of person who could chat to death. He could only set his gaze on Monk Fa Kong, who was sitting on the other side. In the face of the Pantheon world's invasion, the 16 fusing masters naturally had to gather and discuss a feasible strategy. This time, it was Yulian who had issued the invitation, inviting the 16 fusing masters to the Paradise Realm. No matter what their relationship was, it was inevitable that they would meet. Naturally, the 4 who had surrounded and killed Gu Nan 5 years ago were also present. Among them, Song Fei and Hua Kuei had suffered losses. Meng Xian had paid a heavy price, while Monk Fa Kong had suffered a great loss. Not only had the sealed nomological laws been useless, but Gu Nin had also turned the tables on them. More than half of the monks in the 3 Buddha temple had died in the aftermath of the fusing masters' battle. Amitabha. However, Monk Fa Kong was a fusing masters after all, and his ability to maintain his composure was not just for show. Benefactor Gu Nan, we meet again. Gu Nan looked at him and said, "Do you still want me to stay at your house?" The corners of Monk Fa Kong's mouth twitched slightly. No matter how well-mannered he was, he did not know how to respond to Gu Nan's face-slapping behavior. In fact, it was quite common for fusing masters to attack each other, or even to join forces with others to fight. It was just like how Song Fei had tricked Zhou Jiming back then, and Song Fei had secretly attacked Elder Zi Luo. As long as there was no absolute gap between them, this kind of thing was limited to the stage of seeking revenge. It was rare for them to want to kill each other. That was because if the 2 sides had a fight, not to mention anything else, the 2 astral realms would definitely not be able to survive. It would only end in a lose-lose situation. Monk Fa Kong had tricked people before, and he had also been tricked by others. However, he had never seen Gu Nan so keen on face-slapping. Fortunately, Li Si helped him out. "Everyone is here. Let's get down to business first." Yu Lian, who was sitting above, also said, "The battle is imminent. No one can stay out of this matter. Now, please put aside your prejudices and unite against the outside world." Gu Nan was the first to reply. "No problem. I can go and kill a master god first." His relaxed tone of killing a master god, like killing a chicken, caught everyone's attention. "Are you confident?" Yulian looked at him and asked, "Who are you going to kill?" Chapter 511. Read, "You really want to make a move on Eugene? It's fake. Then what's your real target? None of your business." The above conversation took place after the meeting between Zhou Jiming and Gu Nan, who were adept at getting close to each other. Zhou Jiming, who could easily get close to anyone, seemed to have hit a wall with Gu Nan. But Zhou Jiming did not seem to mind, or perhaps he was already used to such situations. Unable to obtain more information from Gu Nan, he could just leave with a smile, and had no intention of continuing to pester him. There were not many disputes or conflicts in this meeting between the 16. Even though this matter had arisen because of Lu Wan and Gu Nan, this battle was unavoidable. This was something that everyone understood. There was no point in discussing responsibility at this time. This meeting was more about strengthening their resolve to face the external threat, as well as formulating their next plan. But any plan seemed insignificant in the face of Gu Nan's "I'll kill one first." Since Gu Nan had this confidence, the group of Fuse Path practitioners did not mind cooperating with him. After all, if the operation was ultimately unsuccessful, it would be Gu Nan who would lose face. It would only cause his words to be ignored in the future, and they would not suffer any real losses. In the Journal of Time, when Gu Nan, Lu Wan, and Jiopa sat together again, the topic of discussion was naturally Gu Nan's. "Do you think that one of us will secretly contact the Pantheon world?" Lu Wan asked. He subconsciously felt that Eugene, the target that Gu Nan had mentioned, was unreliable. Whether in terms of difficulty or strength, Eugene was not the best choice at the moment. In the war between the 2 worlds, Eugene would definitely be the overall commander of the battle formation. There was no doubt about this. To put it bluntly, as long as the war began, he would not leave Austin even half a step. Even if he had to personally enter the battlefield, he would first ensure his own safety. If they could kill Eugene, It would certainly deal a heavy blow to the Pantheon world and cause the entire war system to come to a standstill, but the difficulty was undoubtedly extremely high. There were so many targets that could be targeted. Why would they choose the most difficult one? Even if there's no one, we still have to find someone to leak this information. Gunan said, even if we know that it might be a diversion, so what? How dare they not guard against Eugene's ambush? Gunan took a sip of the green tea on the table. Old Lu, you don't understand what kind of existence the evil gods are in the eyes of these gods. They even believe that I can destroy the world. What else can't they believe? That does make sense. Lu gently stroked the short beard on his chin. He didn't really understand how the sovereigns thought either. At the very least, based on his interactions with Gunan, the latter was not a person with self-destructive tendencies. On the contrary, he was excessively rational. In Lu Wen's eyes, as long as Gunan made a decision, it would definitely be beneficial to him. For this, he could disregard all morals and rules. Sometimes others thought his actions inconceivable, but in the end, he was proved to be right. It was just that at first others could not see some things. Gunan looked at Jiupa and said, arrange for the person to leak the information. I need to find someone in the 16 kilometers, someone who has no relationship with me on the surface, to do something for me. No problem. Jiupa immediately nodded. He had operated in the various worlds for tens of thousands of years, and the current 16 Star-Lord were basically all his juniors. There were many like Song Fei who he had invested in and had a good relationship with, but many people didn't know about them. If Song Fei hadn't caused such a huge impact on old man Ziluo back then, he probably wouldn't have been remembered until now. Within Gunan's divine kingdom, he was sitting comfortably in the evil god's palace, waiting for the person Jiupa had arranged to arrive. After harvesting Fan Luan's sin value, he had taken a big step towards the 13th level. Of course, if he wanted to count on the Blasphemer plan, he would still have to wait for a long time. This would take at least 10 to 20 years, and this was after considering the expansion of the sovereign space and the increase in efficiency. But in reality, with the start of the war between the two worlds, a large number of gods had already fallen, and the Blasphemer plan was just meat on a mosquito's leg. It was better than nothing. I still have to rely on the main gods. Gunan was very clear about his situation. In the future, every main god would be incomparably precious, and he definitely couldn't let them die at the hands of others. Otherwise, he might end up like the main gods he had nurtured himself. 4 main gods and Dao fusing cultivators. The level was not too important. At most, it would affect the upper limit of their power. But what really determined combat power was more the nature of the rules and actual fighting methods, and there were many cases of using a single point to break through. In any case, with the astral world and divine kingdom, everyone's power was almost limitless. But Gunan was different. His level would affect the strength of his evil god body, and this determined how long he could last in front of the enemy. As for the change in attack power, it didn't mean much, since it would only be a punch if he hit. Teacher, someone's... Yan's voice was slightly anxious. Clearly, this person had not entered through the normal route, but had directly barged into the evil god's palace. It's fine. Gunan waved his hand. This was the person that Jiupa had recommended. Inside the evil god's palace, a travel-worn figure appeared in front of Gunan. This was a graceful young girl in a light green dress, and there was a strange pattern drawn on her face, giving her a demonic aura. Apart from Yu Lian and Dream Immortal, this was the only female Dao fusing cultivator in the 16 high school, Qingkong Muqi Shuang. Gunan had met every single one of them in the 16 high school. He only had a simple understanding of some of them, while he had a deeper impression of some of them, and Muqi Shuang belonged to the latter. The reason why Gu Nan had a deep impression of her was that she was a Dao-fusing cultivator with a very special law. This law was so special that even Gu Nan had never seen it before, and perhaps it had never appeared in the entire world of gods. It was a law unique to all worlds. Ginseng was the name of Muqi Shuang's law. Muqi Shuang could communicate with the Dao of any world. Her cultivation was to constantly understand and communicate with the various planes until she grasped every single detail of them. However, There are not that many planes in the world of gods, and a man-made god nation could not be easily touched by others. Naturally, there was no such law. Jiupa, do you need my help? Mu Chi Shuang asked directly after exchanging some pleasantries with Gunan. That's right. Gunan nodded and said, I need you to help me nurture a person so that he can advance to Tier 5 as soon as possible. It would be best if he could join the Gods Guild and go to the world of gods. As he spoke, Gunan handed over all the information regarding Dong's son to Mu Chi Shuang. Chapter 512. Read, the Gods Union had helped a lot when Lorenza became a Lord God. Even Gunan himself had participated in the process. As the first leader god to cross 2 worlds and become a leader god, Lorenza's leveling up process was like crossing a river by feeling the stones. Even the God Union had no experience with this. To ensure absolute secrecy, Lorenza chose to break up her god soul. She gave it to the God Union's members to smuggle it to other worlds. During this process, Gunan hid a piece and used it to create a chess piece. That was Dong's son. Losing a small part of her god soul did not affect Lorenza. She might not have even noticed it, but when this was used by someone with ulterior motives, the whole thing became uncontrollable. In the blue sky, Dong's son, Mr. This person is... You do not need to know who he is. Just follow what is written here. Yes, Mr. Mu Chi Shuang watched her people leave. She looked at the file on the table. She had read Dong's son's information at least 10 times, but she could not find anything wrong. Mu Chi Shuang was not stupid. Gunan was going to attack Eugene, but he was using the 9 spirits to find her who was not related to him. His goal was not simple, but Dongsun's experience was nothing special. He was just a normal person in a normal world. He had a lucky encounter, and now he had break world power. Although his progress was a bit fast considering the existence of the reincarnation system, it was not rare. Perhaps the key was that he had a lucky encounter, but she could not cut Dongsun open to see. She had to wait for him to reveal himself. While Mu Chi Shuang was thinking about Dongsun's history, Dongsun was standing inside the purple net. He curiously looked around. Dongsun had become break world class not long ago, but he had been staying in the original world. He had been busy dealing with the consequences of his past. In some worlds, breaking the world was like ascending. Many people thought, after ascending to become a fairy, they could not come back. So, they had to take care of things. When Dongsun ascended to some major planes, he found that it was not the case at all. He started to understand the nature of this world. He understood the relationship between all the big planes. He gradually understood how to break the world. However, Dongsun still couldn't find any clues about the origin of a voice in his head or the mysterious person he had seen. With Dongsun's current abilities, he didn't have the qualifications to investigate too much. He could only ensure that he could survive. As the most renowned neutral plane, the Purple Luo tribe was already extremely renowned. After Elder Purple Luo progressed to the Dao integration stage and forcefully took over the entire Purple Luo tribe, its fame only increased. Although Old Man Z Luo's methods were powerful, he wasn't someone who would suppress the various large organizations. On the contrary, as long as they were willing to cooperate, they would receive better benefits and treatment. In any case, it was better to have a Dao integration stage cultivator as his backer than to rely on himself. To put it simply, Violet Net had transformed from a loose organization platform into a large-scale organization with a unified plan and a complete organizational structure. The absolute core of this organization was undoubtedly the Gods Union. This is the Gods Union, a young girl said to Dong's son. However, if you want to join the Gods Union, it will be very difficult. Dongsun only smiled. I will do my best. The girl shrugged her shoulders and said non-committally, then I'll wait for you outside. You should be waiting for my triumphant return. Dongsun smiled peacefully. He was like a completely different person from his crazy and stubborn self in the past. If one hadn't seen Dongsun in the past, they probably wouldn't have connected the two of them. The two of them parted ways. Dongsun walked toward the Gods Union, while the young girl turned around and walked toward the back. There was already a green-robed man waiting there. I have done what you wanted me to do. Where is the item? The young girl asked as she stared at the green-robed man. The green-robed man took out a box and handed it to the young girl. 2 ghost spirit fruit seeds. Relax. Our organization won't miss out on such a small reward. The man's words were very honest. No matter what, he was a trusted subordinate of a Tao integration stage cultivator. He wouldn't miss out on the resources of a world breaker. Plus, if it wasn't for the young girl named Qi Ji, it would have been difficult to get Dong Sun to join the Gods Union. The task given to them by their superiors was too urgent. They didn't have time to set things up. They had to start with the people around Dong Sun. Fortunately, they discovered Dong Sun had someone like Qi Ji. She had a high desire for practice resources. She didn't mind doing something for them. Come and talk. The green-robed man smiled. What do you think of Dong Sun? What do you mean? Qi Ji lifted her lips. His power isn't bad. He is dumb and easy to trick. That's all. The green-robed man nodded and said, there will be opportunities like this in the future. Stay with Dong Sun. Do you understand? Qi Ji no longer doubted the man's wealth. She rolled her eyes and asked, who is Dong Sun? Why do you want to set him up like this? That is not something you should know. The green-robed man pushed the table and stood up. His body quickly disappeared from Qi Ji's sight. Qi Ji lifted her lips. She looked away and waited for Dong Sun to return. When she first met Dong Sun, she was already a world breaker. She even helped Dong Sun before he leveled up. That was how the two of them got to know each other. Back then, Qi Ji had only done it casually. Now, it seemed like Dong Sun was a big treasure waiting for her to discover. Should I use this chance to get close to him? Qi Ji's head spun with the idea, but she quickly dismissed it. She needed to figure out why this mysterious organization wanted to lead Dong Sun. If they wanted to do something, she would be dragged into it as well. Qi Ji shook her head. As Dong Sun followed Blue Sky's guidance and walked the path that Gu Nin had designed for him, Gu Nin arrived at the border of the two worlds. His destination was the world of gods, but at the border, he ran into someone he didn't expect. Are you going to do something? Yulian seemed to have been waiting there for a while. She looked at Gu Nan and said, your real target isn't Eugene, right? There were many people who guessed that Gu Nan was blind, but there weren't many people like Yulian who could figure out Gu Nan's path and wait for him to confirm it. Chapter 5:13. Read, this god's hatred for the evil gods originated from their fear. Fear that the evil gods possessed too much power and strange methods that would destroy the entire world. The gods' belief in the ancient legends and their reverence for mysticism made them emphasize the terror and power of the evil gods, even if they ignored their experience. In other words, it was better to believe than to risk the destruction of the world. In the world of gods, this kind of thinking would cause Gu Nin a lot of trouble. But in the world where the two worlds coexisted, it became a point that he could take advantage of. When Gu Nin announced that he was going to target a main god, all the main gods had to be mobilized. No one dared to underestimate him. The words that Gu Nin had released during the meeting had already reached the ears of the main gods, but the authenticity of the news could not be confirmed. Since the fusing gods could not come here personally, it would take some time to confirm the news. But the protective measures for Eugene had already been taken. Eugene sat at the rear of the gods' world and directly mobilized the various armies. This allowed the gods' power to be united and unleash 120% of their power. Austin had left the clone here for a long time. If anything happened, he could rush back at any time. In fact, every main god had the will of a top main god watching over them to prevent them from being defeated by the enemy. The light god system had Austin, the lord of light and justice, and Boswell, the master of Ashen Green. The darkness god system had Lady of Darkness, Daisy, and death god Bear. The master of Ashen Green was the oldest main god and could be called a living fossil among the gods. The death god was not old, but his laws were special. He could be considered one of the main gods with the strongest combat power. Austin was currently out, and Boswell was by Eugene's side. The master of Ashen Green was dressed in a dark blue robe and held a wooden staff that was taller than a person. He had a long beard and white hair, and even his eyebrows were white. Eugene was still constantly issuing orders and directing the frontline battle. But his efficiency was lower than usual, and he often hesitated. Relax. Boswell lightly tapped the staff in his hand and said to Eugene, "The evil gods must be destroyed, and they will be destroyed." Eugene let out a long sigh. He did not deny that it was the evil god's words that gave him pressure, but he knew that it was not fear, but caution. If he forced himself to look down on the evil god because of the existence of the evil god, then he would really be affected. Sir Boswell, are evil gods really that scary? Eugene couldn't help but ask the doubt in his heart when there was no one around. It was normal for Eugene to use honorifics on the Pale Azure King, given his strength and experience. It was impossible for the sovereigns to not have any suspicions about the heretical god's tomb. Just like what I said before, this was a mindset that one would rather believe in. Among the gods, no one would doubt Eugene's words. Only someone as knowledgeable as the Pale Azure Master would ask such a question. He originally thought that Boswell would quote the classics and use various ways to prove the power or cruelty of the evil gods, but the latter only said one sentence. Yes. Boswell just nodded. Never underestimate the power of the Diablos. At the rear of the Pantheon world, the old Boswell stood in front of Eugene. His incomparably confident expression shocked the latter. "I understand." Eugene nodded solemnly. He had completely reined in his perverse nature and was dealing with this with the utmost caution. However, just as Eugene made up his mind, an aura began to appear beside the two of them. "He's here." The Pale Azure King's voice stopped abruptly. The staff in his hand was already pointed at a certain corner, and a green beam of light directly hit Gunan out. The oldest god in the world, the Pale Azure King's rank was roughly between the 14th and 15th rank. However, if they were to fight, Austin dared not have absolute confidence in winning. If Gunan was at the 15th rank, he would have some confidence. Unfortunately, he was currently only at the 12th rank. The suppression of rank caused his shadow precept to lose its top-notch concealment ability, and he was unable to launch a sneak attack. Boswell. Gunan's gaze landed on the Pale Azure King, and he could not help but smile. "I didn't expect that even you would come out." The Pale Azure King and the Demon King Stanley. These two old farts had always been the most mysterious among the main gods, and they would not easily appear in front of others. Unexpectedly, even Boswell had come out this time. The Pale Azure King had no intention of wasting time with Gunan. He waved the staff in his hand again, and a pale azure light began to envelop the entire hall. At the same time that Gunan appeared, the aura of holy light also appeared, and the holy sword once again descended on Gunan's head. Austin had arrived. These main gods did not give Gunan any chance at all. In the blink of an eye, Austin had arrived, and it was no longer possible for Gunan to kill Eugene. Gunan did not hesitate at all, and his figure instantly disappeared. This time, even the Pale Azure King was unable to determine his location. Austin scanned the area with his holy light, and when he did not find any trace of Gunan, he immediately said he escaped. He has someone else in mind. The main gods were not fools. Gunan's sudden appearance and disappearance undoubtedly meant that he had other intentions, and it was most likely that he had another target. Right at this moment, Austin's eyes suddenly flickered, and he quickly disappeared. Daphne. Gunan's sudden appearance at the front line of the battlefield, where the goddess of nature Daphne was, gave the two main gods a fright. Daphne was one of the main gods who had personally arrived on the battlefield, and her current opponent was Qin Guanrua. The two types of laws of life and death quickly alternated, and the entire sky was dyed in two colors. When Gunan suddenly appeared, Daphne was shocked, and she quickly retreated. This was not the first time that she had encountered a gank during a normal battle. After all, not all the main gods and Tao integration stage beings were ready to reveal themselves, and Gunan was not the only one who could think of concentrating their firepower to kill a single person. Daphne's retreat was very timely, but Gunan's movements were even faster. Almost in the instant that he appeared, his fist had already landed on Daphne's head. However, this was different from the sneak attack on Van Lin. This time, Daphne could maintain the highest level of vigilance. When Gunan attacked, she had already set up a nomological barrier. Even though the barrier was instantly destroyed by Gunan's fist, it had still bought her some time, and she had a chance to retreat. More importantly, with Daphne's momentary delay, the holy light arrived again. After being toyed with by Gunan several times, Austin seemed to be angry. Chapter 5:14. Read, torrential holy light descended and engulfed the entire battlefield. Qingguan frowned slightly. He had seen how terrifying Austin was, and his own laws were slightly restrained by the holy light. It was not appropriate for him to stay now. Hence, Qingguan did not choose to stay for long. He also quickly hid himself, but he did not leave immediately. Instead, he observed the situation. In any case, Gunan was considered a member of the various worlds, and Qingguan could not sit back and watch him be killed. However, to his surprise, Gunan did not seem to be affected by the holy light that he could not resist at all. He took a bath in the holy light before turning around and leaving leisurely. After Gunan's aura completely disappeared, Daphne could not help but say in shock, "He got away?" She clearly did not know enough about the characteristics of Gunan's shadow law. In fact, after reaching the 12th tier, the evolution of the laws made it harder for Gunan to be found. This was also the reason why he dared to do this. "It's shadow," Austin said in a deep voice. In the past, Gunan's level was too low, and his enemies often focused on his evil god body and neglected the special characteristics of a shadow law. Now, someone finally realized it. Light and shadow were two sides of the same coin. Even his younger sister was a shadow law user, so Austin understood the special characteristics of shadow very well. This was not a law that was good at attacking, but its concealment and lurking ability were far better than other laws. Austin did not have time to say anything. He disappeared again because Gunan had already gone to find his next target. It was Eugene again. At the rear, Eugene, who had just heaved a sigh of relief because Gunan had been chased away, finally faced Gunan's all-out attack. This time, he did not greet Boswell, and he punched with all his might. The Lord of Pale Cyan reacted extremely quickly. Light instantly enveloped Eugene's body, at least preventing him from being killed by Gunan's punch. However, Gunan's target suddenly changed to himself. Boswell was flung away. Fortunately, he was not completely without the protection of laws, so he was not killed by Gunan in a single blow. The holy light appeared again, and Austin's expression was a little cold. He moved very quickly this time. It was as if the holy sword had eyes, and it landed in the position where Gunan was about to go. However, Gunan did not dodge and let the sword hit him. Half of his body was instantly destroyed. Countless holy flames invaded his body, as if they were going to completely burn his internal organs. However, Gunan only laughed and disappeared again. He had used the power of the shadow law to the extreme. The evil god's body had recovered in the blink of an eye. Austin's eyes were slightly cold. He didn't wait for Gunan to take his place and rushed to Daphne's side in advance. But this time, Gunan's gaze changed again. Lorenza and Daphne could be said to be the two weakest among the main gods, so Austin didn't have any doubts about Gunan's choice. However, he was a little slower this time. It was because he knew that there would be someone else helping him this time. Lorenza's punch landed on the top of his head, but a sickle appeared at the same time, blocking the path of Gunan's punch, causing his punch to fail. Ever since Gunan had completed his second job transition, this was the first time someone had used the power of laws to block his punch. Evil God, a young man in a gray cloak with gray hair and beard, walked out slowly from Lorenza's side, sizing up Gunan with a cold gaze. Death God Bayer. The Death God was also a god that had gone through several generations. Just like the god of knowledge, almost every generation was stronger than the previous one. It was because the more living things that died in this world, the more powerful the Death God would be. This was the case for generations. Faced with the appearance of the Death God, Gunan only pursed his lips and revealed a mocking expression. He did not intend to stay for long either, and disappeared once again under the shadow ripples. No one could catch him, who had the law of shadows, and similarly, no one could instantly kill his evil god body. This meant that Gunan could be active behind the enemy's back alone, and he had nothing to fear. But now, There were only 4 people left from the light gods and 8 from the darkness gods. Could they defend? Gunan's figure flickered, and he once again hid in the shadows. When he looked back at the battlefield again, he felt like laughing. He suddenly realized that whenever the gods of the darkness gods appeared on the battlefield, they would always be in groups of 2. There would not even be a situation where there were more than 2 groups. It was obvious that the Dark God System's members had seen him pulling back and forth a few times, so they were prepared, not to let the 2 main gods protect each other, but to make it easier for the Lady of Darkness and the Death God to keep an eye on them, so that they could rush to the battlefield at the first instance. Interesting. Gunan smiled, and then turned to return to the various worlds. He had already made the world of gods afraid to show up too much, and at the same time, he had distracted the main gods. He had achieved his goal. Zilluo, you did it? You really did it? Qi Ji's eyes widened, and she looked at Dong Sun with a shocked expression. Dong Sun seemed to enjoy Qi Ji's expression. He had always been gentle, but now he looked very pleased. Of course, in reality, Qi Ji knew that Dong Sun would definitely succeed. The mysterious organization had spent so much effort to guide Dong Sun into the God Society. How could they let him fail? But Qi Ji's expression did not change. She continued to look surprised, and she tried to probe the mysterious organization's new movements. Now that you have joined the God Society, does the organization have any missions for you? Qi Ji asked. There is one. Dong Sun nodded and frowned. So, the God Society is a joint organization between the 2 worlds. The first mission is for me to go to the world of gods. The world of gods? Qi Ji looked confused. This time, she was not faking it. She was really confused. The structure of the 2 worlds was actually quite vague to normal world breakers. Dong Sun had only just found out that the world was like this in the God Society, and the first mission that the organization had given him was to go there and kill a target. After listening to Dong Sun's description and knowing what the world of gods was like, Qi Ji could not help but say, that must be very far. Why don't I go with you? Really? Dong Sun looked pleasantly surprised. He really wanted Qi Ji to go with him, but he did not know how to bring it up. Really? Qi Ji nodded firmly, without a hint of hesitation. This was because just now, a voice had mysteriously rung in her ear. If you go with him, you can get double the reward. Chapter 5:15. Read. New. Flower? Is that you, Flower? Don't call me Flower. The consciousness that had just woken up spoke slowly. Its voice sounded weak. Dong Sun looked surprised. He was staying in a hotel. It was rare for him to have some time alone, so he immediately called out to the being in his head. The wisp of soul that called itself Blossoming Flower had, in fact, been forced to overdraft its own strength in an accident during Dong Sun's growth. It had already fallen into a deep sleep. When Dong Sun reached the break world level, his power was enough to feed the god soul. Only then did the flower remnant gradually wake up. Dong Sun, on the other hand, was very happy about Hua's awakening. After communicating with the other party, he told the blooming flower remnant soul about his experiences during this period of time. God's union? The God's world? The flower remnant sounded confused. In my memory, that place seems to be related to my origin. Maybe you can see my real body there. Your real body? Dong Sun said with difficulty. If this remnant soul that had accompanied him saw the real body, would it be taken back? As if reading Dong Sun's mind, the flower remnant's soul smiled and said, right now, I am just myself. I have no connection with the real body. If you can reach that step, maybe we can replace her. After Lorenza disintegrated her own soul and successfully reassembled it, this extra divine soul was no longer connected to her original body. Even the memories she obtained were pitifully small. Her memories of her main body also stopped at the level of the 10th level. If she knew that Lorenza had become a Lord God, she would not have thought like this. What's your mission this time? The flower remnant's soul asked. After understanding the God's union situation, she suddenly cared about this question. Dong Sun did not hesitate and immediately said, they want me to kill a target. I will only know the specific information when I get there. It was not common to not tell the mission information in advance. considering that Dong Sun had just joined the organization, and they had never been in contact with an organization like the Gods Union. The two of them had no objections. Dong Sun was eager to try. He could not wait to complete the mission and get the reward from the organization. An organization like Gods Union gave its members mission rewards. Dong Sun, who was a world breaker from a plane, was shocked. This was only his reward for being an outer member. After all, the official members of the Gods Guild were all gods and star-lords. The flowery remnant soul was silent for a long time, as if it was pondering Dong Sun's overall experience. Then, it said, "Don't you feel that the process of this system is too smooth?" These words caused Dong Sun to be slightly stunned. Recently, he did feel that things were going smoothly, but it was also the result of his hard work, so he didn't feel anything. On the other hand, the blooming flower remnant soul was a bystander. As soon as he heard Dong Sun's description, he felt that there was something wrong. Dong Sun attached great importance to the blossom remnant soul's opinion. After careful consideration, he couldn't help but say, "You're right. I'll have to ask for Elder Tang's opinion before the mission begins." Early the next morning, Dong Sun put aside his quest and informed Qi Ji that he planned to return to Black River World. Dong Sun's hometown was Fu World, the famous frontline plain. However, after obtaining the blooming flower remnant soul, he was sent to another world by Gu Nan. It was Black River World. "Why are you going to Black River World?" Qi Ji asked, puzzled. "The mission is about to begin. Aren't you going to the Pantheon world early to prepare?" Dong Sun shook his head. "My recent experiences seem to have been a little too smooth. I'm going to ask Elder Tang." Qi Ji was slightly shocked. After all, she knew very well that Dong Sun's recent experiences had been deliberately arranged by someone, and even she was involved. "Who's Elder Tang?" Qi Ji suppressed her emotions and changed the topic. She had known Dong Sun for quite some time, but she didn't know much about his experiences before he broke the world. "A senior worthy of respect," Dong Sun said seriously. "Black River World. What a rare guest." An old man in plain clothes smiled as he looked at Dong Sun and Qi Ji. "Dong Sun, what brings you here?" "Elder Tang." Dong Sun bowed obediently, and then introduced the two of them. Qi Ji only bowed politely. She nodded and stood behind Dong Sun. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have much of a relationship with Elder Tang, and he was just a normal person with a supernatural power. She didn't care much about him. If it wasn't for Dong Sun, she wouldn't have even looked at the old man. As for respecting the old and loving the young, that didn't apply to world breakers. Perhaps Elder Tang was even younger than Qi Ji. Before Dong Sun leveled up, Elder Tang had helped him a lot. He had built his own faction in Black River World. "Elder Tang, I'm here because I have something I hope you can help me with," Dong Sun said. He summarized his questions. After hearing that, Elder Tang frowned. He asked Dong Sun a few more details. After a moment of silence, he spoke. "Based on the experiences, it does seem like there is a big power involved," Elder Tang said quietly. But what?" Qi Ji spoke first. She was the one who was most concerned about Elder Tang's answer. Elder Tang looked at Qi Ji for a moment. He shook his head and said, "The God Society is backed by someone from 16 High School. No one can control them." 16? Dong Sun repeated with confusion. He didn't know much about the big factions of the 10,000 worlds. For example, he knew Zi Luo was very powerful. The God Society was powerful, but he didn't know how powerful they were. 16. Qi Ji was different from Dong Sun. She didn't know the background of the God Society, but she had at least heard of the name 16. Dong Sun was still confused, but Qi Ji reacted. She said, "If it is someone from 16 High School, then there is no need to worry about the God Society manipulating them. That is impossible." Elder Tang agreed. "Not bad. Dong Sun, at least you don't have to worry about someone plotting against you when you join the God Society. On the other hand, if you're targeted by a big power, the God Society can be your shield." With Elder Tang and Qi Ji's confirmation, Dong Sun felt a lot more at ease. He felt like he was being a bit paranoid. He was just a normal person who had a lucky encounter. Why would so many big powers be looking for him? Chapter 516. Read. "Since that's the case, I'll take my leave." Dong Sun was in a good mood after receiving a satisfactory answer, so he immediately took his leave. He was in a hurry to return to Ziluo and prepare to head to the Pantheon world to complete the Gods Union's mission. Dong Sun had already made up his mind to obtain a certain status in the Gods Union. If he were to encounter a mighty figure in the future, he would be considered someone with a backer. However, after hearing the name of 16, he inexplicably thought of the silver-robed masked man he had met years ago. He was originally from the Palace world, but he had been forcefully sent to the Black River world. The silver-masked man had even left a black sword in his body. If there's a mighty figure spying on me, it probably has something to do with him. I wonder how he compares to 16. Dong Sun thought to himself. It was a pity that he did not know what he looked like back then. Otherwise, it would not have been difficult to trace his identity. After Dong Sun and Qi Ji left, Elder Tang slowly relaxed. However, another person slowly appeared before him. If Qi Ji were here, she would definitely recognize this person as the green-robed man who had given her resources and the mission. Well done. The green-robed man smiled and nodded. Clearly, he had heard the entire conversation between Elder Tang and Dong Sun. Elder Tang's face was expressionless. He only smiled and said, I wonder which subordinate of 16 High School does Sir belong to? The green-robed man's hand paused slightly. He raised his head and looked at Elder Tang. You know this too? You don't seem like someone from this plane. There is no reason for someone from this plane to be so familiar with Dao integration forces. Elder Tang shook his head lightly, as if this was nothing. Of course, ordinary people can't control the one behind the Gods Union. However, if he's also from 16 High School, it shouldn't be a problem for him to do some things. The green-robed man's expression became slightly more solemn. He said in a low voice, It's best not to investigate things that you shouldn't know about. Of course. Elder Tang smiled. I have no intention of going against a certain sir. Dong Sun is just a friend I met long ago. He disassociated himself from Dong Sun, implying that if a certain sir was interested in Dong Sun, he would not interfere. The green-robed man looked at him deeply. His figure quickly disappeared and reappeared in front of the others. Go and investigate this Tang guy. The azure-robed man said to his subordinates, especially what he did before coming to the Black River era. Not a single thing can be omitted. Yes. The subordinates hurriedly responded and left. However, one person walked over from behind. This person might be a variable. Should we inform the Lord? Forget it. There's no need to trouble you with such a small matter. The green-robed man thought for a while and finally shook his head. He recalled Mu Qishuang's expression when she told him about this matter. It shouldn't be too important. Just as Dong Sun had joined the Gods Guild and was about to embark on his journey to the Pantheon world, the war between the two realms seemed to have paused for a moment. The number of main gods had decreased, but the gods under them were still constantly invading the various worlds, with the goal of destroying the astral realms that had main gods. This was because the two sides were far more determined than before. They began with a battle between sovereigns. As a result, after a long period of fighting, the highest level of combat power on both sides were somewhat fatigued. In fact, many important figures had already been injured, so the frequency at which they attacked had naturally decreased. In fact, in terms of peak combat power, the Pantheon world should be inferior. After all, they only had 12 main gods, while the various worlds had 16. However, in comparison, the fusing gods were indeed not as united. Yu Yin also did not have the prestige of Austin, Daisy, and the others, who could directly order everyone to participate in the war. For example, the God Emperor Zhao Renwang, Jiu Pa, Si Yun, and the others had not taken action until now. Instead, Luan was quite active. This cannot be helped. As the main culprit behind Fan Luan's death, he was given special attention by the gods. There were even people who directly went to his chronology to cause trouble. On the other hand, because of the evil god Gunan's ferocious reputation, the ordinary gods were all warned by the main gods. As a result, not many people dared to disturb Gunan's god kingdom. As the main gods and the fusing gods gradually calmed down, this meant that both sides had entered a phase of war of attrition. They were fighting with human lives on the line to see who could last the longest. Of course, a large part of the reason why the main gods did not dare to show themselves was because of Gunnan. The fact that the main gods had entered a phase of attrition in advance was because of Gunnan. In the blue sky, Muqi Shuang looked at Gunnan, who was sitting comfortably on a chair, and asked with her head tilted, "What do you plan to do?" During this period of time, Gunnan had remained in the blue sky, personally controlling Dong Sun's actions. Muqi Shuang was just a cover. She could not perfectly realize Gunnan's intentions, so he had to personally control this matter. Dong Sun will kill someone he shouldn't have. There was nothing for Gunnan to hide, so he said casually, "When Lorenza finds out, she'll definitely send people to capture Dong Sun." As the executor of Gunnan's plan, the information about Dong Sun's mission could not be hidden from Muqi Shuang. Therefore, she knew very well that Gunnan's true target was Lorenza. So what? Muqi Shuang thought about it carefully, but did not understand what kind of trap there was. The other person is just a character. Lorenza can just send people to kill Dong Sun. She won't, Gunnan said with certainty. Lorenza will definitely capture Dong Sun and kill him herself. When she does so, she'll get a surprise. Muqi Shuang's eyes narrowed. The person you want Dong Sun to kill. Who is it? Lorenza's former teacher. The poisonous fruit that was Dong Sun was close to ripening. He just had to wait for Lorenza to find out and eat him. However, at this moment, Gunnan suddenly left the blue sky. An unexpected situation had forced him to rush to the crack world. This place, which Lu Wen called the original realm, was something Gunnan wanted to investigate after he killed Lorenza, but now he had to return early. The wisp of while he left here told him that there was news from Fu Cheng that the first third transition player had appeared. Gunnan's will invaded the crack world and immediately read all the information about this player, as well as his entire gaming history. This was a homebuddy called Li Han, who was passionate about all kinds of role-playing games. After trying a dozen different methods, he finally succeeded in leveling up his in-game character to the level of the third transition 16th, becoming the true king of Pantheon. His progress far surpassed other players. Chapter 517. Read. Fu Cheng had made the game Radiant Origins very successful. In the Blue Star Federation, Radiant Origins had become a trend. Almost all console players would get their hands on one, and there were more and more high-level players. However, the appearance of a third transition player so soon was somewhat out of Gunnan's expectations. Gunnan projected his will onto the Blue Star once again. He found a random person to possess and went to Fu Cheng's home. According to his previous instructions, Fu Cheng had already left all the information here. Perhaps because Gunnan usually communicated with Fu Cheng in the form of a notebook, the latter chose to print all the information on paper and hand it over to Gunnan. In this era of advanced technology, it was actually rare to still use paper to record information. Fortunately, there was not much information on Li Han. Even if all the information was printed out, it would only be a document as thick as a finger. Fu Cheng's home was a two-story villa. Gunnan quietly entered and then walked into Fu Cheng's study. He swaggered inside and slowly read through Li Han's information. The information obtained through writing was limited. It was only then that Gunnan was able to see the full picture of Li Han's information. This was a seemingly ordinary otaku player. To be the first to complete the third transition and leave the second place far behind, no one would believe that he was not a die-hard otaku. Of course, just being an otaku was not enough. To achieve this, apart from investing a lot of time, one also needed extremely high gaming talent. For example, Gunnan was an expert gamer. This was not the reason, but the result. It was because Gunnan was a gaming genius and had gone through a lot of training to get to where he was today. It was the same for Li Han. In the photo, Li Han was a slightly delicate-looking boy. He was 26 years old this year, and there was nothing unusual about his life. He grew up in an ordinary middle-class family. Although he was not very rich, he did not have to worry about food and clothing. He loved gaming from a young age and became a freelancer when he became an adult. In this era, being a freelancer was no longer a derogatory term. Instead, it had become a synonym for those with special skills. Many people envied them for not having to work from 9 to 5. They could allocate their time freely, and their income was quite considerable. Li Han made a living in the gaming industry. His daily income was mainly made up of game guides, game videos, copyright fees, and a portion of consulting fees. Gunan was actually quite familiar with this kind of daily life because he was in a similar situation back then. As for Li Han's gaming journey, it was not much different from what Gunan had expected. He basically followed the train of thought given by the officials and walked step by step to the third promotion. Although there were some tricks involved, they were still within the scope of permission. Just like Gunan himself, he had tried leveling up twice in a row. These were all unique strategies. All in all, he was a normal player in real life and in the game. The only abnormal thing was that he didn't disappear. Yes, after Li Han completed his third promotion and theoretically completed the entire Radiant Origins game, he was still living a normal life on the Blue Planet. To him, Radiant Origins was like an ordinary, excellent game. He had poured 5 years of his youth into it, but that was all. There was no such thing as time travel or leaving the world through the cracks. What does this mean? Is it that the conditions have not been met, or that another Li Han has already appeared outside? Gunan's imagination ran wild as he tried to guess the possibilities. It was reasonable to say that the conditions were not exactly the same. After all, this was just a copy of Gunan's game. Whether it was the game itself or the timeline, there were no variables that were controlled. However, if it was the latter possibility, it seemed a little funny. Gunan seemed to see himself hundreds of years ago on the Blue Planet. After completing his third promotion, he continued his mediocre life and slowly walked toward death. But now, after just a few hundred years, there was no trace of him left. These thoughts only stayed in Gunan's mind for a moment before he immediately expelled them. No matter what the truth was, he was already a 12-stage Dao integration cultivator. No one in this world could easily erase his existence. Whether the people being thrown out of the world through the cracks was a natural phenomenon or someone was really manipulating it, it did not prevent Gunan from finding out the truth and then killing the threat to him. On the contrary, Gunan became even more determined. When he returned this time, he would instruct people to pay attention to a person named Li Han and the new Holy Light attribute cultivator. Maybe Jiupu is right. Gunan touched his chin and muttered to himself. Only by controlling both worlds can it be the most convenient way to explore the secrets here. On the other hand, since he had come to the world through the cracks this time, should he visit Lu Wen's hometown? Gunan was also interested in the cultivation civilization that existed on the Blue Planet. According to Lu Wen, there were Dao integration cultivators here. Perhaps they had a different understanding of this world. Just as Gunan was thinking about this, the sound of footsteps came from outside, and then the sound of the door being opened. "Mom, who are you?" A girl with light gray hair exclaimed, pointing at Gunan. This was Fu Cheng's daughter, Chun Jingjing. Her surname was like her father's, and even her hair color was the same. Fu Cheng's ex-husband was a quarter white. Chun Jingjing had just returned home and was looking everywhere to see if Fu Cheng was at home. She did not expect to meet such a stranger. 5 years had passed, and Chun Jingjing was now an 18-year-old girl. At least she did not lose her cool and did not shout all the time. She just looked at Gunan warily. The latter did not look like her mother's friend, but more like a burglar. "There are surveillance cameras everywhere near my house. No matter how you came in, you must have been seen." Chun Jingjing took a deep breath to keep her voice from trembling. "If you go out now, I can pretend that I didn't see anything." Gunan's indifferent gaze swept over her, and he had no intention of saying anything to her. He just slowly walked toward the window. Under Chun Jingjing's astonished gaze, Gunan manipulated this body to open the window, and then jumped out. Bang! A soft sound rang in Chun Jingjing's ears. She hurriedly ran to the window, only to see that the stranger had already landed firmly on the ground and was walking forward unhurriedly. Chun Jingjing swallowed her saliva and looked down. Her house was a high-rise villa. Even though there were only 2 floors, the height was close to 7 or 8 meters. Was he an expert who cultivated force? Chapter 518. Read. One after Gunan left Fu Cheng's house, he found a random river and jumped in before withdrawing his consciousness. Even though it had been 5 years since 2 people died mysteriously because they were both related to Fu Cheng, some people would still connect the dots. For now, Gunan did not want the Blue Planet civilization to understand him, and he did not want them to know about high-level cultivators. After his consciousness left Blue Planet, Gunan tried to find Lu Wen's hometown, but the original realm was vast enough. The nature of the starry sky plane determined that it was much larger than the major astral realms. Even with Gunan's current realm, it was difficult to quickly scan the entire plane, and Lu Wen could not possibly give the coordinates of the civilization, so it would take some time to find it. Gunan left a part of his consciousness to search here, and at the same time sent a clone to Blue Sky to keep an eye on Dong Sun's progress. Dong Sun had already arrived at the Pantheon world. Along with him was Qi Ji, who treated him like a cash cow. However, the two of them had a thrilling journey, and it was not peaceful at all. After all, the two worlds were still at war. Going in and out of the two worlds was considered illegal immigration. Once caught, it would not end well. Only the Celestial Society was bold and skilled, and they relied on the fact that there were people in the Pantheon world to receive them. Of course, even in the Celestial Society, both sides were looking out for each other. If Dong Sun did not have the special care of Blue Sky, he would not have been given such a mission. We're finally here. Qi Ji let out a long sigh, grumbling. They had suffered a lot along the way. If not for the fact that she wanted to follow Dong Sun and see if there were any new missions to accept, she would not have been willing to suffer. Dong Sun comforted her, and Qi Ji was also a world breaker. She would not let her actions affect her emotions, and the two of them quickly began the mission. When they arrived at the Pantheon world, the Celestial Society members had already passed the mission information to Dong Sun. This time, he needed to kill an old man called Claude. He was once a top legendary powerhouse, but now that he was getting older, his strength had regressed. An ordinary-looking old man had offended the Heavenly God Society in some way, and they had sent him to kill him. However, it was not as if Dong Sun had never joined an organization before. He knew the principles of these organizations. They were to complete the mission properly and not ask too many questions. Old Claude was at Atrenza, the place that Gunan was most familiar with. This was the most important continent in the game, where many important NPCs gathered. At the same time, it was also the intersection of major quest clues, and Claude was one of them. The relationship between Claude and Lorenza was extremely complicated. He was Lorenza's teacher, and at the same time, Lorenza had once admired him. He had almost become the goddess's lover. But in the end, after Claude noticed this phenomenon, he resolutely left his proud disciple and completely cut off this relationship. Claude knew very well that Lorenza's path could not be filled with love. Otherwise, she would die on the path to igniting the god fire. It was never easy for mortals to become gods. When Lorenza finally became the goddess of flowers and came back to look for Claude, her teacher was already very old. Of course, the lifespan of mortals couldn't compare to that of gods. Claude was able to live until now because of Lorenza's divine power. She turned Claude into her oracle so that he could live forever while bathed in divine power. The price was that Claude could no longer advance, and the two of them were completely different. Is the target an oracle? Dong Sun carefully read the mission information. It mentioned Claude's identity, but of course, it didn't include his past with Lorenza. Even the name of flowers was deliberately hidden, so Dong Sun didn't notice anything unusual. However, the remnant soul of flowers found the name Claude strangely familiar. I feel like I've seen him somewhere. Unfortunately, she was only a part of Lorenza's soul and inherited too few memories. Obviously, she wouldn't have such a deep memory as Claude. Qi Ji said, "The target's strength is similar to ours, maybe a little weaker. He lives a very regular life. It seems that the main goal this time is to prevent him from escaping." Claude lived in a small, remote town as an old knight. No one knew how old he was or where he came from. He repeated the same life every day and didn't practice martial arts. Most of his strength was wasted. With Dong Sun and Lorenza's strength, it wasn't difficult to defeat Claude. Instead, they had to think about how to kill him and how to escape from the gods after killing him. Claude was already very old. His hair was white, and he habitually carried an old man's cane when he went out. Only his spirit was not bad, and his eyes were bright. The god's gift made him immortal, but it didn't give him the motivation to live. He could only live like this day after day, watching his friends and family grow old one by one. Sometimes, he wondered if it would be better if he just died like that. But Claude knew that it was impossible, because every time he was in mortal danger, the divine power from the goddess of flowers would protect him. As an oracle cared for by the main god, he naturally received such preferential treatment. Claude walked on the road, as usual. He didn't like riding in a carriage, and preferred to move forward on his own feet. The next moment, a dim light suddenly appeared in front of Claude. It was a sharp sword that pierced through his heart, trying to end his life. Dong Sun had been preparing for this sword for a long time. With his current realm and years of experience in life and death situations, Claude was no longer able to fight against him. Old Claude watched the tip of the sword pierce through his heart, but there was no expression on his face. Would he still be saved by the divine power? Or would the divine power heal the wound? Claude, who was used to this, was still waiting quietly. However, to his surprise, the moment his divine power soared up, it instantly retracted because it came into contact with Dong Sun's nomological laws. Claude looked at this scene in shock. His heart was completely destroyed, and his body fell heavily to the ground. Is it that simple? Dong Sun looked at the ground doubtfully, confirming that the target was indeed dead. Qi Ji also appeared beside him. She didn't attack immediately to prevent Claude from escaping, but she didn't expect that she wouldn't be needed at all. Dong Sun was a little puzzled. This mission was too smooth, and the target clearly had an extremely noble aura. Why did it suddenly disappear? It wasn't until a voice sounded in his head that Dong Sun realized something was wrong. We may be in big trouble. The voice of the remnant soul of flowers was a little shaky. This old man is the oracle of my main body, and his divine power also disappeared because of me. Chapter 519. Read. 1. I've been discovered. A trace of panic flashed through Dong Sun's heart. However, he was not a rookie, so he quickly calmed down. Will you be taken back by the main body? If there's still a chance, let's leave this place immediately. Having been with the Blossom Remnant Soul for many years, Dong Sun certainly knew that she had developed self-consciousness and was definitely not as simple as a clone of the main body. She definitely did not want to see the main body like this. However, at this point, some things were out of their control. It's too late. The Blossom Remnant Soul's voice sounded again. This time, it was no longer trembling, only deep despair. Dong Sun's heart turned cold, and he subconsciously wanted to leave this place. But he obviously did not know what it meant for the gods to have a messenger specially taken care of. In the blink of an eye, 2 divine lights had already landed in front of them. 2 tall messengers stared at Dong Sun coldly. It's him. One of them seemed to have confirmed Dong Sun's identity, while the other nodded and reached out to grab Dong Sun without the slightest hesitation. Dong Sun did not put down the longsword in his hand. He simply stabbed it at the man while retreating rapidly. Unfortunately, his resistance seemed to be useless. The other party just waved his hand lightly and broke the longsword. Instead, he grabbed Dong Sun's shoulder with one hand, making him unable to move. Just this casual grab made Dong Sun feel that the laws all over his body were suppressed, and he could not move at all. He could only watch helplessly as the opponent attacked. It was the first time Dong Sun had faced such an enemy, but he already realized what it meant. Star-Lord. The strength of a Lord God's messengers was that they could even break through the limit of rank, for after borrowing the divine power of a Lord God. Even a most ordinary rank, 5, was not something a legendary powerhouse could fight against. Dong Sun had no ability to resist at all. The Blossom Remnant Soul in his mind immediately fell asleep and sank into the depths of Dong Sun's consciousness, trying in vain to escape Lorenza's search. Although she knew that it was almost impossible to succeed, there was nothing else she could do. After the 2 of them grabbed Dong Sun, they immediately took him away. They did not even look at Qi Ji from beginning to end, as if the latter was just an insignificant character. After Dong Sun was taken away, Qi Ji turned around and looked around, but she did not see anyone from the Celestial Society. She finally realized something. Did you kill Claude? Lorenza's calm and indifferent gaze fell on Dong Sun's face like moonlight, making him feel like he had nowhere to hide. Yes, yes. Dong Sun felt that his entire body was out of his control as he subconsciously answered. Lorenza sighed softly. Tens of thousands of years had passed, and her impression of Claude had become a little blurry. There wasn't much of their friendship left, otherwise the latter wouldn't have been killed so easily. If Lorenza had paid attention instead of simply protecting Claude with her divine power, she would have been able to save him. But now that things had come to this, Lorenza wouldn't regret it. Perhaps ending this immortal life was a good thing for Claude. Why did you kill him? Lorenza's voice was still calm, but the power that could penetrate people's hearts had not weakened. Dong Sun was just a break-world person. He could not hide anything from the leader god. He honestly said, "I'm a member of the Sky God Group. This is an organization mission." The Celestial Deity Society? Lorenza raised an eyebrow. She hadn't expected this answer. Because of what had happened to Gunan, she was no longer a member of the Celestial Deity Society. Her first thought was that the old man Zi Luo was seeking revenge for what had happened. But then she dismissed that possibility. The old man had no reason to know who Claude was, and it was pointless for him to seek revenge on her. Lorenza's gaze landed on Dong Sun's face. It was as if she wanted to stab deep into his brain and see what was deep in his soul. The resistance of that wisp of remnant flower soul was obviously of no use at all. In front of Lorenza, there was no room for her to hide. "It's my soul." Lorenza recognized what the remnant soul was the moment she saw it. It's from that time she remembered how, in order to become a leader god, she had split her soul and sent it to the heavenly world. She did not expect a part of it to be left outside. But now, this soul had appeared in such an unexpected way. Is it purely an accident, or is someone doing this on purpose? The leader's subconscious caution made Lorenza wonder if there was something hidden behind this. "Go and investigate." Lorenza's voice sounded among the god emissaries. "It's my turn." Gunan's voice sounded as he slowly got up from blue sky. Mu Qishuang already knew his entire plan and knew that he wanted to use this to kill Lorenza, but she was not very optimistic about Gunan's plan. The reason was simple. She did not think that with a leader's cautiousness, he would easily step into Gunan's trap. Even if Gunan asked Blue Sky to appear as a cover so that Lorenza's investigation would not take effect, but the whole thing still lacked a source of motivation. To put it simply, Lorenza had no need for remnant souls. She could absorb them to step into the trap, but she could also be cautious and not absorb them. She only needed to keep the remnant souls in her hands and not be controlled by others. "You don't know Lorenza well," Gunan said. "She will definitely not accept something that comes to her doorstep. But sometimes, being cautious may not be enough to prevent the poisonous fruit from entering her mouth." Gunan looked at Mu Qishuang and said, "If she finds out that I'm the one behind this, she will send Dong Sun far away and find a place to completely destroy him. What if it's me?" Mu Qishuang cooperated and played the supporting role. "She will want to see what you're trying to do." Blue Sky. Lorenza did not have to spend much effort to find the person who was controlling Dong Sun. After so many years, the celestial gods had become a rather complicated organization. Mu Qishuang could control Dong Sun from inside, so Lorenza could naturally find traces. Just as Gunan expected, she quickly brought Dong Sun back after a moment of silence. Lorenza tapped lightly with her finger, and Dong Sun felt a chill between his brows, as if something was being pulled out. His heart was cold. He knew that in the end, he would not be able to protect the Blossom Remnant Soul. Although Lorenza had taken out the Remnant Soul, she had no intention of absorbing it. Instead, she completely enveloped it with the power of laws, trying to destroy her own Remnant Soul. "What are you trying to do?" she said softly. Using the thread of destroying the Remnant Soul, she tried to force the person behind the scenes to make a stand. If he did not make a stand, then she would only lose a wisp of her remnant soul. She had no intention of taking it in the first place. However, What Lorenza did not expect was that after the remnant soul left Dong Sun's body, another force in his body began to awaken. Chapter 520. Read 1. Lorenza was very cautious. She knew how many chances the hidden enemy would have if a strand of soul wandered outside. It was much more effective than hair or flesh. So, she had no intention of accepting the soul that was delivered to her. Instead, she was determined to destroy it and find out the intention of the mastermind. However, at this moment, she suddenly sensed an inexplicable energy fluctuation. Dong Sun couldn't move, but he could feel the power in his body boiling. Then, he felt a pain in his chest. A pitch-black sword instantly pierced through his chest, targeting Lorenza. An evil god. At this moment, Lorenza not only recognized the enemy, but she also understood the details of the whole thing, using the separated soul to attract her attention and bring the hidden power into the divine kingdom. That was the enemy's real goal. For Gunan, the biggest problem in killing a chief god was actually how to get close to them and attack when they were unprepared. If they were already prepared, like Eugene, Daphne, and the others, it was actually far from easy to kill. With Gunan's current power, if he was directly hit by the evil god's body, Austin would probably lose a layer of skin. The only problem was that he couldn't hit. Earlier, when he ambushed Daphne, the highly vigilant nature goddess had already dodged in advance before he actually attacked. She used the laws to slightly delay Gunan's movements and finally escaped. But even a chief god couldn't be in a state of vigilance all the time. When they were relaxed, it was the perfect time to assassinate them. That was what Lorenza was doing right now. Most of her attention was on the remnant soul. She wanted to see what Mu Qishuang's intentions were after all these things. It wasn't that she didn't check Dong Sun, but with the remnant soul of the flowers before, she completely concealed Gunan's power. She only showed her fangs now. The black dagger was as fast as lightning, and it reached Lorenza almost as soon as it appeared. Before Lorenza could block the dagger with the laws, she found that the dagger stopped on its own and exploded. The aura of shadow instantly filled the divine kingdom of flowers. A figure appeared from it and instantly punched Lorenza's head. The shadow dagger was not a killer move, but a springboard for Gunan's descent. From the appearance of the dagger to the landing of Gunan's punch, the whole process was done in one go. He did not give Lorenza any time to catch her breath. Lorenza's divine body shattered without any suspense, and Gunan didn't stop at all. He turned around and began to destroy the flowery divine kingdom. Previously, when they had surrounded and attacked Fanluan, this part of the work had been done by Jiupa and Luwan. However, in reality, Gunan was equally proficient in this. He stabbed the shadow sword into the ground with one hand, and endless shadows quickly spread out, covering the entire divine kingdom in the blink of an eye. Gunan was already at the 12th level of the Law of Shadows, so he was very familiar with these things and did not feel any pressure at all. One by one, the oracles were dragged into the shadows or killed by the pitch-black figures that appeared. They had no chance to resist at all. In just half a quarter of an hour, the entire divine kingdom had completely fallen into the enemy's hands. The efficiency was so high that it made people's hair stand on end. After her divine body was shattered by Gunan, Lorenza, who had not shown herself all this time, finally reformed her body after losing the ability to control the laws of nature to resist. Evil God, you really are the source of all evil, Lorenza said in a low voice, but her body began to emit a blood-red glow. Her divine kingdom was invaded, and many of her people died. She had been forced into a desperate situation. However, Lorenza was a ruthless person who had dared to split her own soul even before she had become a Lord God. Now, she had no intention of sitting still and waiting for her death. Instead, she was in a fight for her last chance. Endless blood burst through the borders of the divine kingdom. On every continent in the world of gods, a blood-red light could be seen shooting into the sky, drawing a blood-red rainbow in the sky. All the lords moved in unison, rushing towards the flowery divine kingdom. During the battle, everyone's attention was on the front lines. They did not expect that someone would attack Lorenza in the rear. In the flowery divine kingdom, endless bloodlight pierced into Gunnan's body. At the same time, Gunnan's fist blew up Lorenza's head. Between life and death, Lorenza made the most resolute decision. She would use her own life as the price to force Gunnan to stay. As Lorenza's flesh and blood flew everywhere, Gunnan's sin value skyrocketed again. He had already surpassed the limit of rank 13, but it was too late for him to level up. The remaining 11 main gods had already arrived. Lorenza had already fallen, but the bloodlight she left behind was the last of the divine kingdom's power, trapping Gunnan like a cage. Even though Gunnan had broken it with a wave of his hand, the moment it stopped him, Gunnan could not escape immediately. Hence, the holy light arrived. As expected of Lorenza, Austin was still the first to appear. He swung his holy sword without hesitation, sealing off Gunnan's path of retreat. If Gunnan wanted to escape by force, he would definitely retreat. This was not the first time Austin had seen Gunnan forcefully open a dimensional passage while withstanding the holy sword's damage. However, the situation was different this time. Austin's expression changed slightly, and his hands did not stop moving as if he wanted to let Gunnan escape. At this moment, a darkness that seemed to devour everything came down from above Gunnan's head. There was no end to it, and there was nowhere to run. Dark Goddess Daisy, the sides surrounded by death, energy, and the azure light that pierced through the sky attacked at the same time. Their target was Gunnan's back, god of Death Bear and master of Azure Boswell. Gunnan faced the combined attacks of 4 of the most powerful overgods in almost an instant, and there were still more overgods rushing over from behind. A moment ago, he had put Lorenza in a desperate situation. Now it was his turn. Come on. Gunnan's eyes were cold. He withstood the holy sword's power with his back, and then punched the scythe and azure light, breaking them apart. The holy sword entered his body, and terrifying holy flames instantly ignited Gunnan's body. The all-devouring darkness began to envelop his head, causing Gunnan's consciousness to turn pitch black, and he completely lost consciousness. The Lady of Darkness was not much weaker than Austin, and in terms of the nature of her power, Gunnan would have a harder time dealing with her. However, Gunnan still did not care. Even though he had completely lost consciousness, he still followed the predetermined route. The route he had set was very special. It did not lead to either of the 2 major worlds, but to the world of cracks. The world of gods was the home of the gods, and to go to the world of heavens, he had to pass through the dimensional wall, which was likely to be stopped midway. The best place to go was undoubtedly the world of cracks. Charge! Charge! Amidst the boundless silence and darkness, Gunnan still kept his consciousness and mind clear. In that instant, Gunnan charged through the spatial passageway, and the combined might of the 4 overgods completely destroyed the space at the same time, leaving no traces behind. Chapter 521. Read 1. Gunnan disappeared again. He was just like those famous assassins in history, shining brilliantly in an assassination, and then no one could find any trace of him after that. Of course, it was a bit embarrassing for him to be an assassin as a path-fusing cultivator. But on the other hand, if the assassination target was a main god, it seemed to become a great achievement. The fall of a main god was always in a large-scale war of the same level, with at least 3 or 4 people of the same level besieging them. They had never seen one die at the hands of a single person. For example, there were several wars of the gods in the early years, and the siege of Luwon, Geopa, and Gunnan. But the Lord of Flowers, Lorenza, died at the hands of Gunnan, and only Gunnan made a move, and he succeeded in a very short time. The result of this battle caused a stir in both worlds. After all, it was related to the fall of a main god, and no one dared to take it lightly. On the other hand, the war between the 2 worlds had just begun, and the world of gods had already lost 2 main gods, which was a blow to the morale of the gods. Everyone understood that the war was essentially a war between main gods and path-fusing cultivators. No matter how many ordinary gods and star lords there were, they could not affect the upper echelons. But once the war broke out, whoever made the first move would be at a disadvantage. But what about the front line? Two main gods had already died in the rear. What was the point of fighting? The dark cloud of defeat had begun to envelop the sky of the world of gods. Still haven't found him? Austin met with the Lady of Darkness, Daisy, and their expressions were solemn. Until now, they had not found Gunan. Daisy shook her head gently. We have been looking for him since he disappeared that day. The bit wall has not fluctuated, so he has not returned to the heavens. If he is not hiding in the gap between the two worlds, he must still be hiding in some corner. Although she said there were two possibilities, Daisy was obviously more inclined to the latter. After all, the gap between the two worlds was too narrow. They had searched it before, but naturally, they had found nothing. It had to be mentioned here that the location of the crack world was indeed very remote. It was so remote that if Gunan had not discovered Taoist Netherworld first, he might not have found the original realm even after a year and a half of searching. It wasn't that no one had explored the gap between the two realms, but since ancient times, only Taoist Netherworld had discovered the location of the original realm. This was not something that could be explained by luck. Austin agreed with Daisy's opinion as well. He had some understanding of Gunan's concealment skills. He believed that Gunan must be hiding in some corner of the Pantheon world, secretly licking his wounds, waiting for the moment when his wounds were completely healed before he would come out again to hunt down lords. He felt that day was not far away. However, Austin might be disappointed because when Gunan's will awakened, he had already arrived at the world of the gaps, which was also the original realm that Lewin mentioned. The first thing that came into Gunan's eyes was a boundless starry sky, somewhat similar to the Milky Way in his memory. Gunan did not study astronomy in his previous life, nor could he tell where he was from the star map. However, after his will awakened, he successfully connected with his body. Just as he had expected, the combined attack of 4 top lords had seriously injured even the body of the evil god. Lorenza is still Lorenza. Gunan could not help but shake his head. He did not expect Lorenza to be so resolute. She did not care about her last chance of survival and wanted to drag him down with her. After all, the god of flowers, who was at the level of a lord, was an extremely rare situation even in the game. And the darkness from the Lady of Darkness had left countless negative statuses on his body, which greatly slowed down his self-healing process. Only after the power of these rules was expelled could his body return to normal. Therefore, Gunan was not in a hurry and simply waited here patiently. Thus, he discovered that there was a huge civilization on the star path not far from the will. A coincidence? Gunan raised his eyebrows slightly, but he immediately understood. He did not know how long his will had been floating in the sea of stars. This kind of floating was not irregular. On the contrary, it would be attracted by a large number of living beings. In fact, it had come to him on its own. However, if he could find a civilization even while floating freely like this, it could only mean one thing. He had probably been in the original realm for a long time. What a pity! Gunan could not help but shake his head gently. If he had been asleep for more than 100 years, perhaps the battle outside would have already ended, and most of the arrangements on the blue planet would have been in vain. For powerhouses at the path integration level, time was really not something that could be used. Their existence in the world was too huge, and the interference of their will with the rules was definitely not a joke. It was useless to think about this now. After his will awakened, his body would recover in a month at most. Gunan began to look at the huge civilization below. This civilization was indeed very powerful, to the extent that Gunan had never seen it before. According to the calculations of his previous life, this civilization spanned at least 3 galaxies, modified and controlled more than 60 administrative planets, and a large number of uninhabitable resource planets, all of which were constantly supplying resources to the civilization. There was definitely no such civilization in the heavens. There were not many starry planes to begin with, and it was even more impossible to have one of this size. Even in the Milky Way sky, a large number of people gathered in the center of the plane, and there would not be more than 20 administrative planets. More importantly, Gunan felt a familiar aura inside the civilization. This familiarity did not come from acquaintances, but from the level. There were path integration cultivators of the same level here. Without much hesitation, Gunan descended to the ground. Anyway, he was just a wisp of will. At most, he could use a part of the rules, so he was not afraid of being besieged. Just as Gunan entered the civilized star region, 3 wills immediately rose from the center of the star region and quickly approached him. After a short while, 3 figures appeared in front of Gunan. These 3 people were dressed somewhat similarly, all wearing long robes of Taoist robes. The old man in the middle wore a Taoist crown, and a strange dragonfish pattern was embroidered on his chest. He had a calm expression, and on either side of him was a man and a woman. The man's hair was disheveled, and there was a look of indifference on his face, as if he had no interest in Gunan. The woman's Taoist robes were neat, and her hair was neatly tied behind her head. There was a sharp look in her eyes. 3 path integration cultivators. I'm old Taoist Xianhe. Greetings, fellow cultivator. The old man performed a strange greeting. He did not speak, but directly transmitted his will to Gunan. They had all rushed here because they sensed the aura of a sage. However, seeing as the other party was waiting calmly, he did not have any ill intentions. Chapter 522. Reading. One after a short conversation, Gunan understood the identities of the 3 people in front of him. They also confirmed that Gunan had no ill intentions. The old Taoist priest, Xianhe, was not a traditional Taoist priest. His real name was Xianhe. On the other hand, the fierce-looking woman was a Taoist priest and called herself Taoist Blue One. The undisciplined young man was called Su Anting, and he was an itinerant cultivator. On the capital planet, in a quiet and secluded courtyard, the interstellar civilization, Gunan stood by the window and looked at the scenery outside as he muttered softly. This civilization, which the 3 sages called the interstellar civilization, had indeed reached an unimaginable level. The core of the interstellar civilization was a cultivation civilization. However, when a civilization developed to a certain level, a part of the technology tree would naturally be illuminated. However, like the heavenly worlds, most of it was metaphysical technology. Therefore, what entered Gunan's eyes now was the strange scene of a group of people in long Taoist robes driving a hovering flying car. Taoist Gunan, have you been here before? Xianhe asked as he walked out from behind Gunan with a faint smile. The 3 of them naturally did not believe Gunan's claim that he was an interstellar wanderer. Given their realm, they could naturally see Gunan's current state. This person was clearly just a will that had descended. Even his body had been condensed temporarily, so he definitely had his own foundation. However, there was actually a second civilization in the universe that possessed sage-level power. This was what Xianhe and the others were interested in. This is my first time here, Gunan replied calmly. Do sages like you usually leave the star field to explore? It was not difficult for Tao integration experts to directly project their will outside, and they would not be affected by the harsh environment of the starry sky. Of course we do, Xianhe nodded and said. However, the vastness of the universe is unimaginable. It is too inefficient for us to search for extraterrestrial civilizations. Such matters are usually done by fleets. Xianhe had expected Gunan to ask this question since he had come from an extraterrestrial planet. As he conversed with Xianhe, Gunan slowly learned about the current state of the interstellar civilizations. Due to the highly stable space laws of the original realm, even path integration practitioners could only teleport short distances within the original realm. Breaking the boundaries was impossible. Any barrier was stronger on the inside than on the outside. Gunan could barely squeeze in a bit of his will from the outside, and the people inside could only be trapped here. Is the original realm a cage? This thought flashed through Gunan's mind, but it quickly disappeared. There had never been a cage that would reflect information from the outside world and continuously transmit information to the outside world. After a short exchange, Gunan continued. Do you guys know a person called Luan? He should have been on the verge of becoming a sage. Xianhe shook his head. I've watched the stars get to where they are today. I've never heard of this person. Gunan thought for a moment and said, the names might be different. He's a person who has mastered the dual laws of space and time. You see, my master, Before Xian could speak, Taoist Blue One's voice suddenly rang out, and he quickly appeared in front of Gunan. Only then did Gunan take a closer look at her. He realized that the style of her Taoist robe was indeed similar to Lu Wen's. Even though Xian was the one who spoke to Gunan, Taoist Blue One and Su Anning clearly did not relax their surveillance of this place. Gunan's gaze slowly fell on Taoist Blue One. He was not surprised. There would not be many super civilizations that had path integration practitioners. It was very likely that there was only one. The possibility that this place was related to Lu Wen was very high. Lu Wen was a figure from tens of thousands of years ago in the interstellar civilizations. His real name was no longer known, and only his Taoist name, Heavenly Spring, was left behind. In his previous life, Lu Wen did not have many friends, nor did he have an illustrious master. He was more like a lone cultivator, and he did not even have many personal disciples. Now, 10,000 years later, there was only Taoist Blue One. "You've really seen my master before?" Taoist Blue One stared closely at Gunan. "I've met him once." Gunan had an unfathomable look on his face. You know, in the endless Milky Way, one can always meet all kinds of people. Taoist Blue One's expression was solemn as he said, "But he's already dead. He died during the tribulation to become a saint. Perhaps he was lucky enough to survive." "Impossible. Then why didn't he come back to take a look?" Taoist Blue One's emotions instantly became agitated. Gunan shook his head lightly and did not continue on this topic. He turned to look at Xian and the old Taoist. "Then do you know a person called Taoist Huang Quan? Perhaps Lu Wen's survival had something to do with him." Taoist Blue One shook his head to indicate that he did not know. However, Xian said, when Heavenly Spring was undergoing his tribulation, there were some strange words. "Oh, what did he say?" "To become a saint is to trap oneself. The heavenly worlds." The time that Gunan had slept was actually not as long as he had imagined. It had only been a few years. During the time that Gunan had disappeared, the two realms had already engaged in a true battle. Many gods and astral lords had died on the battlefield, and even one fusing Daos had fallen. The one who had died was Qin Guanruo of the Netherworld skies. This rather ambitious fusing Daos, who was not considered old, had finally caught the attention of the lords because he had frequently taken action in the great battle. In the end, Austin and Bayer had joined forces to first kill his main body on the battlefield. Then, with the help of the Nightmare Lord, they had once again sneaked into the Netherworld skies. The fusing Daos of the heavenly worlds were actually even more inexperienced when faced with enemy attacks. The lords had a great battle every 10,000 years or so, and it was not as if they had never fallen before. But what about the heavenly worlds? In the early years, there was a saying that the astral lords had fallen in a great battle, and their descendants had inherited the astral realm. However, such a thing had not happened in the past 10,000 years. Even battles between fusing Daos were rare. Therefore, if Qin Guanruo had been caught off guard and Austin and Bayer had chased him all the way to the Netherworld skies, he would have fallen in the blink of an eye. There would not have been any time to rescue him. Finally, one of the fusing Daos of the heavenly worlds had fallen. This greatly boosted the morale of the heavenly worlds, and the flames of war were ignited once again. The heavenly worlds, which had not been united to begin with, began to retreat under the attacks of the gods. Very soon, they had entered a situation where each side fought for itself. In the midst of the great battle, only Gunan's god nation was like a piece of pure land. No matter what happened outside, no one dared to come and throw away their lives. However, as the flames of war spread into the heavenly worlds, very few people obeyed the prohibitions of the lords, and gods constantly entered the god nation to attack. Fortunately, with Yin Xiaoxiao's current abilities, she was already able to temporarily mobilize the power of the god nation, so that it would not be destroyed. Until one day, Gunan's figure suddenly appeared in the evil god's temple, and a deep and mysterious aura began to emerge throughout the entire god nation. Gunan slowly opened his eyes and saw that the god nation was in a complete mess. Chapter 5:23. Read, One Patries was a newly ascended god, and his divine occupation was cold. This was a very common divine occupation. There were at least a dozen elemental gods in the world of gods, and there were quite a few fire gods as well. However, there had never been a main god, and the divine occupation was one of the four great fundamental origins, so everyone had a chance. Patries was an ambitious god. He was quite active in the war, but he was also very careful to protect himself. He had survived until now with a mere level 6 power. The secret to his ability to do this was to try his best not to fight against truly strong enemies. He focused his energy on causing destruction and never stayed on the main battlefield for too long. After a few rounds of such operations, he realized that it suited him very well. Cold was essentially a derivative of the divine occupation of water. Patries had the ability to hide himself in water, in which astral plane did not have water. Water became the best hiding place for Patries, and the heavenly worlds were not self-created astral planes, so there were too many flaws in the eyes of the gods. Patries almost effortlessly assassinated the powerhouses of these astral planes one by one, rapidly weakening the power of these astral lords so that they could be defeated one by one. As the operations became more successful, Patries' ambition grew. He was already quite famous among the gods, but he was not satisfied with just that. He wanted to be the most eye-catching person in this war. What could make one more famous than invading the astral plane of a path converger? Gunnan's disappearance was no secret. Most people were inclined to believe that he was trapped in the world of gods to heal, so his astral plane must be the most empty. However, Patries now regretted it. What is this? Patries looked ahead in disbelief. In his line of sight, there was a cloud of black fog rapidly covering the entire astral plane. This vigilant god did not hesitate. He immediately retreated from the astral plane, and only then did he look down with lingering fear. Just as he expected, as long as the black shadow swept through the area, all the invaders would be dragged into it, and there would be no more sounds to be heard. What frightened Patries even more was that the black fog's devouring targets were extremely precise. There was not a single mistake, and not a single one was missed. This meant that the black fog's control over this astral plane had reached an unimaginable level. It must be the evil god's return. No. Before Patries could finish his thoughts, a shadow had already appeared behind him and swallowed him whole. Gunnan slowly opened his eyes in the evil god's temple. After dealing with the little bugs that had snuck into his divine kingdom, his sin value had increased slightly, which meant that there were a few gods among them. Of course, it wasn't entirely Gunnan's own ability to be able to achieve absolute accuracy. It was more because he borrowed Yin Xiaoxiao's control over the God Kingdom. Only the spirit of the Divine Kingdom could be as familiar with every corner of the Divine Kingdom as it was with its own body. Teacher, next time before you disappear, can you tell me first? Yin Xiaoxiao's helpless voice sounded. It was obvious that she had spent a lot of effort dealing with the attacks during this period of time. Gunnan smiled and said, "There won't be a next time." Yin Xiaoxiao was slightly stunned, but Gunnan had no intention of saying anything more. His gaze paused on the Divine Kingdom for a moment before he quickly retracted it. He had already recovered to his peak condition. The sin value from Van Leeuwen and Lorenza had also allowed him to step into the ranks of the 13th level. Even if he had to face the attacks of the four main gods again, Gunnan was confident that he could escape unscathed. If it was a one-on-one battle, Gunnan wouldn't be able to suppress Austin by himself, but he wouldn't have anything to fear because Austin wouldn't be able to kill him alone. From the second-class advancement until now, Gunnan had spent more than 10 years, and he could finally say that he was invincible. What he needed to do next was to kill all those who needed to be killed. As the other side of the Divine Kingdom, Yin Xiaoxiao seemed to sense what Gunnan was thinking. She said in a low voice, "Teacher, are we going to start a massacre?" "More or less." Gunnan nodded and said, "Jiopur is right about one thing. Only by completely controlling this world will it be easier to investigate some things." Gunnan had completely stabilized his realm of the 13th level. His power had reached a whole new level, but he wasn't in a hurry to plunder the sin value. Instead, he went to another place. Jiopa Heaven. You mean Luwin already knew that there was a world outside the original realm. Jiopa revealed a thoughtful expression after listening to Gunnan's narration. Gunnan didn't tell him the source of the information, nor would he reveal that he had entered and exited the crack worlds. He only told him what Luwin had said before his tribulation. I suspect that Huang Quan told him. Gunnan said calmly. Huang Quan likely discovered the original realm long ago, and even communicated with Lu when in his previous life. Jiopa nodded with a solemn expression. He understood Gu Nan's meaning. Right now, only the four of them could confirm that they were from the original realm. If Lu Wen and Huang Quan had colluded long ago, then it was their turn to be careful. We have to speed up the plan. Jiopa understood the situation. Lu Wen had already regained the power he had in his previous life. They had to act as soon as possible. Right now, his and Gunnan's only advantage was that they were above the other two in terms of power. They had to make use of this time to completely pacify the two worlds. We have to make them engage in an all-out war. Gunnan said calmly. Although the Great War was going on, the only master gods and convergence practitioners who had truly died in the war was Qin Guan Ruo. Jiopa's gaze turned to Gunnan. Not everyone is willing to use their full strength. How do you plan to make them do it? Gunnan smiled. If they are not willing to use their full strength, then we'll go to their house to fight. This is a vicious plan. Jiopa couldn't help but be amused. Who are you going to find first? Dream Immortal? Xiyin? Dream Immortal of the Cloud Dream Heaven and Xiyin of the Milky Way Heaven were both convergence practitioners who had not put much effort into the Great War. They had only shown their faces once or twice. However, Gunnan didn't think much of these two small characters. He directly said, Zhao Renwang, the world of gods. A god nation stood high above the clouds. Holy light and a holy aura were everywhere inside, preventing anyone from having any thoughts of blasphemy. This was the god nation that belonged to the King of Gods, the god nation of the Lord of Light and Justice. It was the last pure land in the world. If one day the world was engulfed by evil, then this place would fight to the last living creature, shed their last drop of blood, and swear to kill evil. And so, evil came today. Gunnan's figure suddenly appeared in the god nation of light. A heavy sword slashed into Austin's main god palace. A holy light boundary appeared instantly. Although it could not resist Gunnan's monstrous power, it purified all the shadows he used to form a sword. Not even a speck was left. Chapter 5:24. Reading. 1. You're very bold. Austin's voice sounded from behind Gunnan. He had already appeared and was looking at Gunnan coldly. Apart from a few who had surrendered, all the enemies who had dared to step into his divine kingdom had closed their eyes forever. Gunnan turned around and only smiled at him. His smile was clearly filled with one word: arrogance. Austin could tell that the evil god's realm had increased once again. It was so fast that he had to be vigilant. Evidently, this was the reason for his arrogance. But did he think this was enough? The holy sword suddenly fell. In the holy light kingdom, the power of this sword reached a terrifying level. Gunnan, who had long been able to resist the holy sword outside, was now at the 13th rank, but he was still turned into ashes by this sword. Only a shadow under his feet was still moving. Austin did not stop at all. Holy flames instantly swept over, and the shadow on the ground disappeared without a trace. However, Gunnan's aura did not dissipate. Loud laughter could be heard in the air. Gunnan's figure appeared once again and then disappeared quickly. He had long been prepared to escape. The previous one was just a clone. You can't escape. Austin's voice was still cold and calm, but there was a hint of certainty in it. He could easily leave a mark on those who dared to enter the Holy Light Kingdom, and the Holy Light would guide them. Tracking methods were never rare, especially in the hands of someone at Austin's level. Long before he appeared, he had already left a mark on Gunnan's body with the help of the omnipresent Holy Light in the Divine Kingdom. Although it was a hasty move, the mark could stay for at least a few days, which was enough for him to track Gunnan. Although he did not know why Gunnan had appeared in the Holy Light Kingdom, Austin had no reason not to seize the opportunity since it was right in front of him. His figure flickered, and he appeared at the darkness god system's side. I left a mark on the evil god. Cover me when I enter the heavens, Austin said to the Lady of Darkness, Daisy. Daisy was slightly stunned, as if surprised by the evil god's reappearance. She nodded and said, all right. Moments after Austin and Daisy came to an agreement, the four peak overgods appeared in the two-realm battlefield and charged toward the heavenly worlds. After hearing about the whereabouts of the evil god, Bayer and Boswell didn't hesitate and immediately participated in this operation. All of the Tao integration stage cultivators were given a fright upon seeing this. The four strongest main gods had all appeared. This meant that they had completely given up on defense. Was this the final battle? Yu Yin and Jiu Pa appeared immediately, along with Zhao Renwang. The Star Lords of the three primeval star realms represented the highest combat power in the heavenly planes. Zhao Renwang rarely fights, but now he had no choice but to show himself. Very soon, he was glad that he had made it in time. That was because Austin was rushing towards the divine Emperor Heaven under the cover of the other three. The three who were being held back by Daisy and the others were startled. Zhao Renwang immediately abandoned his opponent, Bayer, and turned towards divine Emperor Heaven. At this time, no one accused him of being selfish. A Star Lord could use at least 120% of his power in his own star realm. Instead, Yulian and Jiupa were doing their best to help him stall for time. Zhao Renwang moved extremely quickly. In the blink of an eye, he had already appeared in front of Austin. The ancient bronze sword that appeared in the sky landed heavily on Austin's head. The human sovereign sword that had been passed down since ancient times was up against the holy sword of the King of Gods. If this was any other time, perhaps Austin would have the intention to fight him. However, he was in a hurry to track down the evil god. How could he be in the mood? Austin blocked the human sovereign sword with his holy sword. Then, he pushed with his left hand. The golden scale appeared again and landed directly on Zhao Renwang's head. Austin, who had two peak godhoods, rarely used impartial. However, it could often produce shocking results at critical moments. Zhao Renwang had fought Austin before, so he wasn't afraid of this light core god. Even though his own realm was only around the 13th rank, the human sovereign's special nomological laws allowed him to fight against Austin. However, he had never seen Austin use impartial before. When the scale landed, Zhao Renwang instinctively slashed with his sword. Then, he discovered that the human sovereign sword was actually suppressed by the golden scale. On the other side was Austin's holy sword. He had actually used his holy sword as the price to temporarily trap Zhao Renwang. The next moment, Gunan's figure appeared first. He was right behind Austin and fiercely punched him. Of course, Gunan wouldn't foolishly wait for the other party to find him. Instead, he took the initiative and pretended to be here to help. Austin knew that the evil god was here, so he was naturally prepared. A ball of holy flame exploded from his right hand. A terrifying shockwave crashed into Gunan's body. Austin was a core god who had risen from the War of Gods. His battle awareness was extremely high. He immediately found a way to deal with Gunan. Pure nomological laws would be directly blasted away by Gunan's immense strength. Instead, he would first convert the nomological laws into physical power, which would at least provide some resistance. However, Gunan's body of the evil god had been strengthened, and the power of his punch had reached an unimaginable level. The holy flame was instantly shattered, but he himself was sent flying by the shockwave. Austin followed him like a shadow. He immediately withdrew his holy sword and slashed it directly at Gunan's body. At the same time, the golden scale also pressed down on Gunan's head. Gunan didn't have any intention of staying. He used the evil god's body to forcefully block Austin's sword. However, he also took the opportunity to escape the suppression of the golden scale. His figure instantly disappeared. Gunan wasn't one of those Tao integration stage cultivators. He was all too clear about the power of the golden scale in Austin's hands. He had to escape from it. And with this delay, Yulian, Jiu Pa, and the other Tao integration stage cultivators all arrived. The scene was a little chaotic. Bayer stood beside the Lady of Darkness, Daisy, and narrowed his eyes. Let's stay here. Austin left a mark on that evil god. so he won't be able to escape. Daisy and King Dark Azure both nodded. With their strength, they weren't afraid of being surrounded by Tao integration stage cultivators. There was always a chance for them to escape. However, none of them expected that Austin would reappear in such a short time. He's escaped. Austin only used 2 words to express what he meant. Where did he go? King Dark Azure, Boswell, couldn't help but ask. He knew that there was no way Gu-Nin could escape from Austin's surveillance. The front lines, Austin replied in an indifferent voice. The other 3 instantly turned around. Sure enough, Gu-Nin was already standing behind Beast God, who was hurriedly taking cover. At this moment, they suddenly understood what Gu-Nin was trying to do. He was clearly using himself as bait to start a war between main gods, and he had succeeded. Chapter 5:25. Read 1. Gu-Nin appeared on the front lines. His first target was Beast God Bridges. Austin and the other 3 were in the heavenly realms and couldn't come to his rescue in time. Others had to help him. A faint purple mist enveloped him, and a netherworld river flowed behind Gu-Nin. Above him, violent storms and thunder intertwined. In front of him was the image of a sinister-looking demon. The moment Gu-Nin appeared, the beast god retreated rapidly. Behind him, 4 chief gods attacked at the same time to stop Gu-Nin. Master of Nightmares Kos, Master of the Netherworld River Ogiest, Storm Chief God Raymond, and Demon King Stanley. They were the remaining 4 chief gods of the Darkness God system. Faced with the sudden arrival of Gu-Nin, these 4 chief gods attacked at the same time. The Tao integration practitioners of the heavenly realms definitely weren't this united. For example, Austin had already wreaked havoc in the divine Emperor Heaven. Excluding Yu Lian and the other 2, only 2 or 3 Tao integration practitioners had appeared. However, this wasn't important, because Gu-Nin, who was already at level 13, didn't care how many people stood against him. No matter how many nomological laws you gathered, it would all be a single punch. With a single punch, the storm shattered, the dream collapsed, the netherworld river flowed backward, and the demons retreated. Only then did the beast god's divine body shatter with a look of disbelief. The battlefield instantly fell silent. Li Si, who was originally fighting the beast god, looked at Gu-Nin with a strange look in his eyes. Breaking the combined nomological laws attack of 4 chief gods with a single punch, and then directly shattering the beast god's divine body. Li Si suddenly felt that perhaps the gods were right. This person's growth rate wasn't normal at all. If he was allowed to continue developing, perhaps no one would be able to stop him anymore. Death God Bayer was the first to arrive. He had always had a good personal relationship with the beast god. A cold glint flashed across his eyes. Chief gods relied on godhood to gather nomological laws. Although they wouldn't die on the spot when their divine bodies were destroyed, they would suffer greater losses than Tao integration practitioners. They definitely couldn't ignore it. The death god's scythe suddenly descended, but Gu-Nin calmly raised his head. There was still the aura of level 4 laws left on his body. His head twisted unnaturally before he punched the cold scythe. The power of Bayer's all-out attack couldn't be underestimated. This saber strike directly chopped off half of Gu-Nin's shoulder, revealing the sinister white bones within. But the wound was healing at a terrifying speed. Gu-Nin smashed the scythe with a punch and then shook his right hand. The injury caused by the scythe had already healed. He flashed a cold smile at Bayer, and his figure suddenly disappeared. His target had already become the Grim Reaper. Austin and the other 2 had also arrived. If the evil god wasn't in the heavenly worlds, they wouldn't be so foolish as to fight on someone else's home ground. That would be equivalent to seeking their own deaths. Bayer had already become Gu-Nin's target. Thus, the 3-star masters of the 3 original realms also found their own opponents. Zhao Renwang was slightly weaker, so he didn't let his anger get to his head. He stared at Boswell, while Jiupa went to look for Austin to continue the unfinished battle from last time. Back when they were hunting Van Leeuwen, Jiupa had fought with Austin for a short while. At that time, he had underestimated justice and almost allowed Austin to get rid of him. It was Gu-Nin who made up for the last step. This time, Jiupa obviously wouldn't make such a mistake again. Yu Lian's opponent was the Lady of Darkness, Daisy. This was also the only battle between the old and the new. Daisy was actually much older than Austin. She had even met Yu Lian's teacher before, but Yu Lian had only inherited the Grotto Void Heaven in this generation. Apart from these three groups, all the main gods of the world of gods had already joined the battle. The four main gods of the Darkness Divine System who had attacked earlier appeared together. The goddess of nature, Daphne, and the Lord of War, Eugene, arrived together. Even the beast god, whose divine body had been destroyed once, walked onto the battlefield with a gloomy expression. At this time, the Tao Convergence practitioners of the world of gods naturally wouldn't hold back anymore. The battle between the two worlds had already reached the most critical stage. At this time, the battle between the main gods and those below the Tao Convergence level had actually stopped. This was because everyone knew that the final outcome of the war would be decided by this battle in the gap between the two worlds. Everyone had found their opponent, but there was one person who wasn't so well-behaved, and that was Gunan. Gunan smashed his fist toward Bayer. The latter was already prepared, and his body was in a state of half-life and half-death. However, Gunan's fist smashed into thin air. Bayer swung his scythe in a reverse grip, and a dense aura of death surged out from the realm of the dead, wanting to drag Gunan away from the world of the living. Gunan grinned, and his body instantly disappeared into the shadows. His scythe similarly missed. In this round of exchange, neither side had gained the upper hand. Bayer wasn't anxious either. As long as Gunan appeared from the shadows, it would be impossible for him to escape his targeting. He knew that Gunan's regenerative abilities were extremely powerful, but as the death god, he had a law that he could deal with. As long as enough aura of death accumulated in Gunan's body, the final detonation would definitely cause massive damage. The next moment, Gunan's figure suddenly appeared on the other side, and he ruthlessly smashed his fist toward someone. Beast God Bridges. Bridges was practically about to spit out a mouthful of blood. Why was this lunatic looking for him again? This time, no one could help him stall for time. All the main gods had their own opponents to deal with. Only Bayer was unoccupied, but when his scythe slashed down, Gunan didn't even spare him a glance. The scene of a divine body exploding appeared again, and the pitiful beast god was blasted into smithereens once again. The price was that Gunan had been hit by the scythe again. Moreover, Bayer's reaction was extremely fast. When he swung his scythe, he was also attacking Bridges' enemy. This time, it was Gunan's acquaintance, Muqi Shuang of Blue Sky Heaven. Muqi Shuang wasn't weak, but her laws were rather restrained by the death god, so she was barely able to withstand the scythe. Bayer originally only had the idea of cutting his losses, but he didn't expect to have some unexpected gains. Hence, he immediately threw aside Gunan, who was even more slippery than a loach, and focused on dealing with Muqi Shuang. In Bayer's opinion, if he allowed Muqi Shuang to go against him, it probably wouldn't take long for her laws to be sliced into smithereens. Hence, Gunan had to help. His thinking was basically correct, but would Gunan care about Muqi Shuang's life? With a flash, Gunan had already appeared where Daphne and Zhou Jiming were. Hence, Daphne was also blasted down by Gunan's 3 consecutive punches without anyone's help. The vigilant Daphne dodged 2 punches, but there was no such thing as staying on guard for long. She was still blasted into smithereens by Gunan. Damn it! Bayer's eyes were filled with boundless killing intent, but his mind was extremely clear. He knew that it would be very difficult to capture Gunan, who was shrouded in shadows, but he didn't expect him to completely disregard the lives of his comrades. Since that was the case, Bayer forced Muqi Shuang away with a single slash. He ignored the other Tao integration stage powerhouses and headed straight for the battlefield of the 3 strongest powerhouses. Chapter 5:26. Read. Bayer was very clear-headed. He knew that if he followed behind Gunan, he would at most eat some of the dust. In the end, the entire battle would be dragged down by his tactics. Although this kind of tactic made him very angry, this was a battle to the death. Who cared about morality? Thus, Bayer made the best choice. Since Gunan liked to deal with ordinary chief gods, then he would force Zhao Renwang to retreat. If Boswell, could also free up his hands. Even if he had to compete with Gunnan in speed, his side would definitely have the advantage. Lord of Fangqing immediately understood Bayer's meaning. He pointed his staff into the distance, and the sky full of green light became even denser. Even Zhao Renwang's human Tao King energy was suppressed. The Grim Reaper's scythe attacked from behind. Zhao Renwang's mouth twitched, but he couldn't bring himself to ask Gunnan for help, so he could only try his best to hold on. But he was the weakest among the top 7. Now that he was being attacked by the two, how long could he last? With the tacit cooperation of Lord of Fangqing and the Grim Reaper, Zhao Renwang was hit by the Grim Reaper's scythe 4 times. Bayer directly detonated the death aura in his body, and his body instantly exploded. The damage caused by the Grim Reaper was not comparable to the damage caused by Gunnan's body. The death aura directly attacked Zhao Renwang's nomological laws, which could be considered to have injured his foundation. It could be said that Zhao Renwang would not be able to fight again in a short period of time. Taking advantage of the time that Bayer and Boswell were dealing with Zhao Renwang, Gunnan continuously attacked the other main gods. His movements were extremely fast. Without the support of a top chief god, ordinary chief gods could not resist Gunnan's attacks at all. They were directly wiped out. The other 5 chief gods of the darkness god system were all injured. The most unlucky one, the beast god, had his divine body destroyed for the 3rd time. Nature goddess Daphne had also been destroyed twice. Even if the destruction of the divine body was slightly better than being attacked by the nomological laws, it also meant a large loss of godhood. It was impossible to ignore it. Bayer and Lord of Fangqing exchanged a glance. They were very clear that with the characteristics of their nomological laws, it would not be easy to catch Gunnan. Since the other party wanted to exchange a life for a life, then so be it. Without any communication, the two of them pounced on a Dao integration cultivator next to them. It was Song Fei, who looked relatively weaker. Song Fei's nomological laws were useless in battle, and his cultivation base was not high either. Naturally, he was a pushover among the Dao integration cultivators. However, because of Gunnan's decisiveness, he was besieged. This was the most painful thing. Since when had Gunnan become so important? Song Fei was barely hanging on, and in the blink of an eye, he was killed by the two of them. His true spirit quickly returned to Shi Dao Tian, and he did not even have time to retract his loss. It wasn't that Song Fei didn't want to give it his all, but the combined might of 2 rank 14 overgods was not to be underestimated. When Bayer and Boswell joined hands, their efficiency in defeating the Dao fusing cultivators was no lower than that of Gunnan. In fact, the damage they could inflict was even greater. The beast god could appear again and again, but Song Fei did not dare to show himself again. Otherwise, he would really be in danger of dying. Bayer and Boswell found Dream immortal. She had yet to recover from the injuries inflicted by Gunnan, so she was a good target. Gunnan also found the Lord of Nightmares, who had just returned. Austin and Daisy had Jiupa and Yulian to deal with, while Gunnan and Bayer started a hunting competition. This was exactly what Gunnan wanted. Speaking of which, there was nothing he could do. After all, no one could capture Gunnan. If they did not start a hunting competition with him, could they just watch as Gunnan slaughtered over gods? On the other side, Yulian could already feel the pressure from the old senior. She did not even have the chance to throw out most of her Dao techniques before they were directly swallowed by the boundless darkness. If not for some secret techniques from the Grotto Void Heaven, perhaps she would have already been defeated and would not have been able to fight back. Jiupo and Austin were evenly matched, and neither could suppress the other in a short period of time. Jiupo was already on guard against justice, so he would not be easily defeated by Austin. With his strength, it was not a problem for him to stall the battle for now. Your people can't last much longer. Are you still not going to retreat? Jiupo smiled and pointed in a direction. In the direction he pointed, Daphne was once again targeted by Gunnan. Her power was starting to weaken, and she could not resist at all. Soon, Gunnan shattered her divine spark. If not for the war between the two worlds, she would have long hidden in the divine kingdom. Why would she come to die again and again? Austin's expression was cold. Aren't you the same? It's not the same. Giopa shook his head and said seriously, Gu Nan will kill people. There was a new change in the battle. After Gu Nan killed Daphne again, he quickly left the battlefield and had no intention of appearing again. Bayer and Master of Dark Azure looked at each other and immediately returned to the world of gods. When they arrived at the divine kingdom of nature, they saw that Gu Nan was already there. His divine body is strong, but it is also a drawback, Bayer said in a low voice. As long as we completely destroy him, he will not have the chance to interfere in this battle. In this battle, the two worlds would definitely have a winner. As long as they completely conquered the heavenly worlds, they would have time to deal with Gu Nan. Boswell said in a low voice, I will protect Daphne. You find an opportunity. Death nodded solemnly. If Gu Nan wanted to kill, he would not flee. They all knew that this was the best opportunity. However, Bayer soon realized that he did not need to deliberately find an opportunity, because Gu Nan did not even think about hiding his actions. He stood openly in the divine kingdom of nature, and the law of shadows rapidly radiated outwards, engulfing all the living beings in the divine kingdom. Boswell once again raised his staff high, and the light of dark azure fell upon the divine kingdom of nature, rapidly protecting a portion of the living beings and constantly resisting Gu Nan's law of shadows. In a pure confrontation of laws, Gu Nan was not stronger than Master of Dark Azure. Gu Nan also understood this, so his figure flickered and appeared behind Boswell, and he suddenly smashed his fist down. Bayer, however, seemed to have long since anticipated this. He appeared in front of Gu Nan in advance, and the death scythe blocked his path. A scene similar to the one before occurred. The scythe left a serious injury on Gu Nan's body, but Gu Nan's fist also smashed the scythe into pieces. However, with this delay, Master of Dark Azure was naturally able to retreat calmly. None of the lords would be negligent in battle. Gu Nan just smiled. His figure rapidly flipped, and he punched out from all directions, all of them targeting Master of Dark Azure. Bayer was like the most astute hunter. No matter which angle Gu Nan attacked from, he could accurately block him. One more strike. Bayer estimated the strength of his opponent's divine body. As long as he was hit by the scythe again, the eruption of the aura of death would be enough to completely destroy his opponent. The shadow appeared again, and Bayer did not hesitate to strike heavily at Gu Nan. That's enough. Bayer's spirit was roused, and he immediately detonated the aura of death in Gu Nan's body. However, Gu Nan's subsequent actions startled him. It was as if Gu Nan knew what he was going to do, and he flew in front of Boswell. Chapter 5:27. Read, never in his wildest dreams would Boswell have imagined that Gu Nan would use such a method to perish together with him. The aura of death had directly detonated within Gu Nan's body. Although Gu Nan was the first target, when he was close to the Pale Azure Lord, the latter naturally could not escape. Almost at the same time the aura of death erupted, Boswell felt a terrifying shock wave attack him. The power of the laws also erupted in an instant. With Bayer's level, his attacks were naturally at the law level. His original intention was to kill Gu Nan with this. At the very least, he wanted to completely destroy Gu Nan's body and laws so that he could no longer participate in this battle. But now, Boswell had also become the target of this attack. He similarly could not withstand such a terrifying attack. The laws in his body collapsed almost instantly, and his divine body also fell apart. This was not because the Pale Azure Lord was too weak, but because the aura of death accumulated in Gu Nan's body was simply too much. It could be said that ever since Bayer became a lord, there had never been anyone who could withstand so many of his scythes and accumulate such a large amount of aura of death. Ordinary people, even if they were a lord, would have long been chopped into pieces after receiving so many scythes of death. But it was also because of Gu Nan that Bayer was able to accumulate such a terrifying aura of death. When it erupted, even Boswell found it hard to resist. Bayer realized that he had been used by Gu Nan, but his combat awareness was also quite astonishing. He rapidly restrained all his emotions and rushed toward the center of the aura of death. He did not believe that Gunan would take the initiative to commit suicide. There was definitely another reason for him to do so. However, when Bayer arrived at the center of the aura of death, he discovered that things were not that simple. Just like Boswell, Gunan was blown into pieces by the aura of death. However, his flesh and blood were not completely corroded by the aura of death. Instead, they were rapidly mending together. After reaching the 13th rank, the strength of the heretic god's body had already exceeded the understanding of ordinary people. Just a drop of blood was enough to revive Gunan. Bayer's eyes narrowed. He rapidly manipulated the aura of death and used all his strength to corrode Gunan's flesh and blood. Unfortunately, Gunan was far more tenacious than he had imagined. The flesh and blood that were drifting around condensed in every detail, giving Bayer no time to make a move. This was different from the previous 2 times Gunan was surrounded. First, he was already at rank 13, and second, there was no daisy to interfere this time, so there was no top-notch law of darkness to suppress his recovery. In the blink of an eye, Gunan's body was regenerating everywhere. To Bayer's left, he saw Gunan with half of his head restored. To his right, he saw Gunan with a reconstructed arm. Every part of Gunan's body was as strong as a normal body. He didn't know which part to kill. Just a moment later, a complete Gunan reappeared, and the destroyed Law of Shadows also gathered again. Gunan even nodded at Bayer as a sign of respect, revealing a friendly smile. If it weren't for this person's help, he wouldn't have been able to deal with Lord Ashen so easily. The next moment, Gunan's figure disappeared again. The Law of Shadows once again enveloped the entire nature divine kingdom, and the entire Gunan fell under his control. Bayer tried to use the aura of death to fight against the shadows, but what followed was Gunan's punch. A moment later, when Boswell barely managed to reform his divine body and arrived at the nature divine kingdom with his damaged laws, he could only see Bayer standing there with an ashen expression. Lord Ashen sighed in his heart. He knew that their efforts were ultimately unable to stop the evil god's actions. Daphne, dead, Bayer said with a sullen expression. Bayer had watched helplessly as a main god died in front of him. This was the first time he had felt this powerless feeling of having a body full of laws and power, but nowhere to release them. He had never seen an opponent like Gunan. It was as if Gunan was incomparably familiar with all his methods and had completely seen through his tactics. This was an extremely inconceivable thing. A main god's laws could be used in countless ways, many of which even they themselves weren't aware of. They were completely used according to the circumstances of the battle. However, Leyland could even predict these methods in advance. This was no longer something that could be explained by experience. Bayer even suspected that this evil god had some sort of short-term foresight ability, which was why he was able to do such unimaginable things. But no matter what, Daphne still died in the hands of Gunan. At this point, the light god system only had 3 main gods left. Other than Austin and Boswell, there was only the Lord of War Eugene. Meanwhile, Gunan had already drifted far away. 3 main gods, Vinland, Lorenza, and Daphne, had already died in his hands. His sin value had increased by a large margin. Originally, after killing 2 rank 11 main gods, he actually had some surplus in his sin value, which had exceeded the boundary of rank 13. But now, there was Daphne, who was at rank 12. His sin value had exceeded Vinland and Lorenza by a little, but there was still a considerable distance to reach rank 14. There's still quite a gap. Gunan looked at the increase in his sin value. The gap was still rather large. More importantly, the sin value that the main gods could provide was a number that fluctuated according to their levels. The fluctuation could be very large, and it was difficult to accurately estimate. Even if he calculated the maximum value, he had to at least get rid of the remaining 5 main gods of the darkness god system to have any hope of reaching rank 14. After coming to this conclusion, Gunan could only shake his head lightly and speed up to the next god nation. That was the Beast God Bridges god nation. In the gap between the 2 realms, Geopa saw Austin's movements suddenly stop, and she could not help but smile. Seems like it has already begun. Gunan had the ability to hunt down main gods alone, and he was extremely efficient. He would not leave any space for his target to escape. This was his strongest point. Moreover, his super recovery ability and the law of shadows ensured that very few people could stop Gunan. When he attacked those who were weaker than him, no one could protect the latter. Of course, Austin knew that Gunan had already killed Daphne and set off for the Beast God's God Nation. Meanwhile, Boswell had suffered serious injuries because of Gunan's trap. Let Bayer and the others come back, Austin suddenly said to Daisy. At the same time, he raised the golden scale and sent it to another battlefield. This time, the golden scale's target was Yulien, who was struggling to fight the Lady of Darkness. Daisy's expression turned cold, but her movements were not slow at all. The darkness that could devour everything instantly enveloped her. Austin's timing was very tricky. Yulien had to deal with Daisy's suppression, and she was already mentally and physically exhausted. She was instantly caught off guard. The golden scale landed on top of Yulien's head. This time, the scale was not used to control Yulien's power. Instead, it brought over a part of the darkness. And on the other side of the scale, there was already a ball of holy light shining. The combination of Austin and Daisy, the combination of light and darkness, an almost impossible and inconceivable combination, was achieved by Austin with fairness. Chapter 528. Read, a terrifying shockwave erupted from the gap between the two realms. Even Geopa was affected by the collision of light and darkness. As the first target, Yulien was destroyed almost instantly. If Bayer were here, he would definitely have the feeling of, I've seen this episode before, because just now Boswell had suffered a similar fate. Boswell's divine body was blown up by Gunan's large amount of deathly aura. Yulien was also destroyed by the power of light and darkness. Yulien's injuries were not light either. She was not much worse off than Boswell. Giopa was also affected. His figure instantly disappeared into the void, and when he came back, Austin and Daisy had both disappeared. Giopa frowned. He quickly scanned the area with his divine soul to find the two lords. Then, he discovered a shocking fact. Austin and Daisy had taken Bayer with them. The three of them had charged into Zhao Renwang's divine Emperor Heaven. Did they not care about their nest? Giopa was stunned for a moment, but he quickly understood their plan. They wanted to compete with Gu Nan in terms of speed. They wanted to exchange the lives of lords and Dao integration cultivators. Those who could become top lords would not lose to anyone else when it came to ruthlessness towards their own people. Divine Emperor Heaven. Zhao Renwang was probably the most annoyed person now. For the sake of the overall situation, for the sake of tactics, sacrificing some individuals was a very normal thing. But when the person to be sacrificed was themselves, it was not something that anyone could accept. Moreover, he had no choice. It was the enemy who had chosen him. Even Giopa would find it difficult to resist the joint attack of Austin, Daisy, and Bayer, let alone Zhao Renwang. Moreover, he had just been injured. In fact, if he was not in his astral boundary, he might not even have lasted the first round. He would have been killed by the three. Giopa quickly returned to Divine Emperor Heaven to help Zhao Renwang stabilize the situation. If the three lords killed all the people of Divine Emperor Heaven, even Giopa would not be able to save him. However, Zhao Renwang was having a hard time holding on. A large number of people in Divine Emperor Heaven were dying. Giopa could not protect him. On the other hand, Austin and the other two were unstoppable. Where's Yulien? Zhao Renwang had already seen Giopa. He questioned her loudly. Giopa said solemnly, Yulien was attacked by Austin and Daisy. Her injuries are probably worse than yours. Zhao Renwang opened his mouth, but no words came out. He knew very well that if even Yulien was injured like this, it would be very difficult for her to help him. After all, it was impossible for her to have the home advantage. If she came to the Divine Emperor Heaven to help, the three of them might immediately change their target and kill Yulien first. It had to be said that Austin's choice was very smart. The tactics he used seemed to be the same as Gunan's, but Gunan relied on the fact that he was hard to kill and even harder to capture, so he slowly nibbled away at the various sovereigns. However, when Austin and the other two joined forces, no one could contend against them in terms of absolute strength. In terms of destructive power, they were far stronger than Gunan. And at this critical moment, destructive power meant efficiency, and efficiency decided the outcome of the battle. On the other hand, Austin and the other two's super strength meant that they could directly go to the divine Emperor Heaven, but Gunan could not go to the Songqing divine kingdom. With his level 13 nomological laws, if he wanted to destroy the Songqing divine kingdom, Boswell did not even need to show himself. He could just use the nomological laws to resist him. Even if the master of Songqing was only injured, he could still delay Gunan for a long time. After all, that was his home ground. At the beginning of the war between the two worlds, the Pantheon world seemed to be at a disadvantage because two of their sovereigns had died first. However, their top-notch combat power was stronger than that of the celestial world. Now was the time to cut their losses, and they could make full use of this advantage. If both sides exchanged non-top-notch combat power, the final victor would undoubtedly be the Pantheon world. Austin's eyes were cold. His control of the nomological laws was extremely precise. He was like a war machine, purifying all the evil in the world. Zhao Wang could only grit his teeth. He knew that all the Dao fusing experts were being held back. Yu Yin and Gunan, who had the right to interfere in their battle, were already in trouble, and the other was in no mood to care about them. However, at this moment, an unexpected savior appeared. The sky above the divine Emperor Heaven was suddenly covered by two huge shadows. Upon closer inspection, it was actually two giant dragons that traversed the horizon. Austin frowned and raised his head. However, he felt as if he was in a strange space. His control over his godhood and nomological laws had been weakened to an extremely low level. In this space, distance was pulled apart, time was compressed, and everything became extremely slow. The nomological laws broke away from the trio's control and were rapidly eroded by Jiupo's ley line power. The divine Emperor Heaven instantly stabilized the situation. Lu won. Zhao Wang raised his head in shock and saw Lu Wen's figure standing calmly in the sky. His seven-star Taoist robe was still hanging on his body as he overlooked the battlefield below. The Pantheon world. Indeed, Gunan's efficiency could not compare to Austin and the other two working together. At the same time, due to the strength of his own nomological laws, he could not directly find a top-notch lord. However, he was extremely adept at dealing with non-top-notch lords. The beast god's divine kingdom was already in an extremely dilapidated state. Bridges was gritting his teeth and holding on. The situation he was facing was even worse than Zhao Wang's, because there was no one who could help him at all. Moreover, the unpredictable and unstoppable Gunan brought him pressure that was no less than Austin and the other two. Another moment later, the beast god's divine kingdom was completely swallowed by the shadows. All the living beings either fled or were completely killed by Gunan. Bridges was the only one left, a lone commander. Bridges stared coldly at Gunan. He had held on until the very last moment, and then he had run. That's right, he had waited until his divine kingdom had been completely destroyed by Gunan to buy himself enough time. Then, without another word, he had turned and run. Back when Austin had come up with the strategy of exchanging positions, he had already issued an order to all the lords. If they encountered a demon god targeting someone, then they were to think of a way to buy time and then run. If the divine kingdom was destroyed, it could be rebuilt. As long as they could protect themselves, as long as they won this battle, they would have a chance to start over. This was a battle where the two worlds were betting everything they had. No one could stay out of it. As Gunan watched Bridges' disappearing figure, a strange smile appeared on his face. If he thought that he could escape just like that, then he was really too naive. His figure disappeared on the spot, and then he quickly invaded the holy light divine kingdom. He found a familiar god and appeared before her. Chapter 529. Reading. Under normal circumstances, Gunan would not be interested in entering the holy light kingdom. This was Austin's base camp. Not only was there extreme holy light nomological laws everywhere, but it was also easy to attract Austin himself. For example, Gunan had entered the Holy Light Kingdom to attract Austin's attention and make him leave a mark on him, so that he could lure Austin to the divine Emperor Heaven. This time, he also had a special goal, and that goal was Sylvia. Ever since the war between the two worlds broke out, Sylvia had been kept in the Holy Light Kingdom by her brother in case she was kidnapped and turned into a hostage. After all, the Holy Light Country was the safest place in any other place. Unfortunately, even if Austin discovered the abnormality in the Holy Light Kingdom at this critical moment, he would not be able to rescue her in time. Jiupe and Zhao Renwang would not let him leave so easily. Even if he could leave, his invasion of the divine Emperor Heaven would be in vain. In just a split second of hesitation, Sylvia had already been taken away by Gunan. Worlds in the heavens. Austin sensed what was happening in the Holy Light Kingdom, and his expression suddenly turned cold. However, he also knew that it was too late to return now. Therefore, his purification of the divine Emperor Heaven became much more intense. Even Daisy and Bayer could not understand it. Did Austin have a personal feud with Zhao Renwang? On the other side, Sylvia was captured by Gu Nan without any preparation. At this moment, she was glaring at Gu Nan fiercely. "Evil God, just kill me!" Sylvia shouted. "Don't think that I will tell you anything, and don't think that you can threaten my brother." Sylvia did not need to think too much about Gu Nan's purpose in capturing her. Of course, it was for her brother. However, she was wrong. What Gu Nan wanted to do did not require her cooperation. He only needed her god's blood. Sylvia's nomological laws were completely sealed. She felt her vision blur, and she was brought to a dilapidated Holy Light Kingdom by Gu Nan. If it wasn't for the fact that there were still some patterns left in the god's palace, and that Sylvia had been to the beast deity's divine kingdom before, she wouldn't have believed that this was once the kingdom of a god. "Beast god," Sylvia murmured. The next moment, she felt a sharp pain on her wrist. She had been cut by the shadow blade, and divine blood was flowing out of her wrist incessantly. "You." As soon as Sylvia opened her mouth, her voice was sealed by Gu Nan, and she couldn't say a single word. The divine body of a god was closely related to the divine title, and the blood of a god was even more precious than the blood of a dragon. It could even be said that the blood of a god itself came with an extremely strong power of laws. Sylvia's divine blood was absorbed by Gu Nan, and an extreme shadow was rapidly produced. It then followed the beast god patterns in the main shrine and extended a strange path in the void. Looking at this route, Sylvia could not help but widen her eyes. After all, this was something that extended from her body. She could vaguely feel what the end of this line was pointing to. That was Bridges, the beast god Bridges. My blood, why does it have such power? Sylvia was in disbelief. Not only was she puzzled by the phenomenon itself, but she was even more puzzled by how Gunan knew about it. Of course, she could not bring herself to ask this, but Gunan seemed to understand what she was thinking. He said with a faint smile, "Austin is already the embodiment of laws. You who are connected to him by blood naturally have this characteristic as well. In the laws of the world of gods, bloodlines were an extremely close connection. When a god ascended to a new realm, all of his relatives and children would receive a certain upgrade. It was not a coincidence that the children of God usually had greater talent than the average person. Even though this upgrade was hidden, and most of the time, even the relatives themselves could not feel it. Of course, Sylvia knew this, but it was even rarer for a god to receive an upgrade because of his bloodline. Because of Austin, Sylvia also possessed the characteristics of laws. To a certain extent, her blood represented the shadow, and the law of shadow itself had the ability to track. This was common knowledge. Gunan had yet to reach level 15 and reach the pinnacle of nomological assimilation, so he could only borrow Sylvia's power for now. Bridges was hiding in a small plain, looking at his broken god nation while gnashing his teeth. He was doing his best to hide himself, hoping that they would win the war so that they could go all out to encircle this damned evil god. Thus, when a strange black thread slowly connected before him, Bridges had yet to realize what had happened. He only felt a pain at the back of his head. Gunan's figure had appeared beside him at some point in time, and landed a punch. Bridges did not even have time to react to this unguarded sneak attack. His divine body was instantly blasted apart, leaving nothing behind. The terrifying, explosive power of the evil god's body was used to its pinnacle in a sneak attack. A lord had fallen in an instant. Gunan harvested sin points once again, and then immediately set off for the next god kingdom. This time, his target was the Devil King Stanley. Bridges is dead. Austin's voice rang out again, this time with a rare, gloomy tone. They had clearly been prepared, but Gunan had still managed to kill a lord. The development of the situation had already exceeded his expectations. Exchanging a lord's god kingdom for the life of the enemy's Tao integration deity, or taking advantage of the enemy's lack of organization, was rather worthwhile. However, exchanging a life for a life was not worth it. But now that things had come to this, Austin and the others had no chance to turn back. They were riding a tiger and could not back down. The Lady of Darkness, Daisy, said with a sullen expression, "We can only rely on them to stall for time. Let's speed up." Bayer did not speak, but he used his actions to prove his attitude. The deathly aura started to spread wildly across the divine Emperor Heaven. Bayer no longer cared about his own exhaustion. Lewin was still standing in midair, using space-time laws to stall Austin and the others. But in a battle of this level, surprise attacks could only be used once. After the first wave of space-time laws was destroyed, it was very difficult for him to set up another one. The pressure on Jiupe and Zhao Wang was getting greater and greater. Even with Lu Wen's help, they were only able to delay the destruction of the divine Emperor Heaven by a little. For someone to be able to interfere in a fight of such a level was already an unexpected occurrence. Hoping for Lu Wen to have the ability to turn the tides was truly too much of a burden. Give up. Jiupe sighed at Zhao Wang. The astral boundary can still be rebuilt if it's destroyed. If Austin could understand this logic, the other Tao integration deities naturally understood it as well. It was a pity that the lords could make such a decision, but Zhao Wang could not. The reason was very simple. The divine Emperor Heaven had been passed down for countless years before finally falling into his hands.